See that we're live. I think we can let the participants in.
We're guilty.
And we will start to mute folks here. There we go. Okay, I see that we're recording and that we're live. So yes, Madam Chair, I believe you can start anytime you'd like.
Good morning. My name is Julia Rady. I am the chair of the Toronto Preservation Board. We have quorum, so I'm now calling meeting 15 to order. Welcome, everyone. Today's meeting is being held by video conference and is also being live streamed online at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. Although we may be meeting in different locations today, the Preservation Board would like to acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. If you are registered to speak at today's meeting, please listen for me to call your name. I will call speakers in the order they appear on the list. The list of speakers can be viewed online by visiting the Toronto Preservation Board link at toronto.ca/council and clicking the speakers box for today's meeting. Members, the City Clerk has provided all agenda materials on toronto.ca/council. As a reminder, please submit and approve your motions by email. Staff are available at hertpb@toronto.ca to help with motions. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? If you do have an interest, you need to please raise your hand or unmute your mic and indicate the item number and the nature of the interest. Seeing Jeff.
I have a conflict with respect to the Leaside item. I think it's number 12, and I've already submitted a form disclosing the nature of that interest.
Matthew?
Just to be clear, this is PB 15.13. And this is 1779, 1787 Bayview. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the item is PB 15.13. Could you just state the nature of your interest?
The nature of the conflict is that I was on the negotiating team for the Leaside Residents Association that came up with the settlement agreement in respect to this application.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Are there any other declarations of interest? Seeing Adam.
Yep. I have two. Item 15.2, Cawthra Square, and bear with me while I describe the nature of my conflict.
You can keep it very succinct, I promise.
Okay. I flagged these properties and nominated them for heritage status in January 2023 and met with the developers as a community historian twice in 2023 alongside the Church Wellesley Neighborhood Association. I was not paid for these meetings. In November 2023, I was hired by the Church Wellesley BIA and later appointed their interim director in December 2023. The Toronto and East York Community Preservation Panel, which I am a chair of, and the Church Wellesley Village BIA, which I am the interim director of, have both sent letters opposing demolition of 6, 8, 10. Yeah.
Adam, I'm going to stop you there. We just need to know the nature of your conflict, please, and thank you.
I have 1 sentence left, and it will summarize it.
As long as it's just suited the nature of your conflict.
Yeah. So the panel and the BIA have both sent letters opposing demolition and supporting retention preservation and received a total of $11.
Please, sir. Please. I think, Matthew, do we have the nature of the conflict at hand?
Okay.
And what about the next item?
15.11. I represent the Church Wellesley Neighborhood Association at the Ontario Land Tribunal regarding the development application. We have participant status, not party status. The representation is unpaid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wynn.
Thank you.
Moving on with our agenda. So we're going to now proceed to the agenda review. The first item is PB 15.1, 24 Mason Boulevard. Notice of intention to designate a property under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There is a presentation from Heritage Planning staff available if the board would like to hear the presentation. Would anyone like to hold this item? Would you like to hold the item, Alex?
Well, I would either like to hold the item but it's basically very brief. I would just like to congratulate the owners on their designation request. So whether that is,
I think we can do that at this point and,
Right.
and think. So let's say we have a staff report before us with recommendations. We would like to move the staff report. Alex, all those in favor? And to Alex's point, thank you so much to the two owners of the property, Karen Kane and Ross Petty. They did tremendous work in flagging this wonderful piece, and we can see it designated now. So thank you very, very much. Moving along. Yes, Matthew.
Madam Chair, we just need to go back in the script to do the minutes.
Oh, sure. Of course we do. I love skipping things apparently on Monday mornings. Apologies, everybody. Could I have a motion, please, to confirm the minutes from our last meeting on February 15th, 2024? All those in favor? I think I saw Matthew raise his hand. All those in favor? Perfect. Minutes carried, and we will now roll along. The next item is PB 15.2. 6 and 8 Cawthra Square, notice of intention to designate a property under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There are public speakers registered on this item, so it will be held. The next item is PB 15.3, 346 Yonge Street, 7 Elm Street, 13 Elm Street, and 34 to 52 River Street, inclusion on the Heritage Register. There are public speakers registered on this item, so it will be held. But I also have a note that this won't actually be held. This is going to get deferred to the March 28th meeting, and this has been done in agreement with the applicants. There are speakers. Speakers have the opportunity to either speak at the meeting today or at the next meeting. So everybody will have their time to have their 5 minutes. They have agreed and will speak at the next meeting. So this item is deferred. The next item.
Sorry.
Yes, please. No,
Yep, all good.
Keep me honest.
We would need a motion to defer the item from someone, and you would need to vote on that, please.
Can I have a motion to defer the item, please? I will motion to defer the item. All those in favor? Fantastic.
Madam Chair, I do have a question about that deferral.
Sure.
You refer to them as the applicants. I'm not aware of a development application for that site. Is there a risk of a development application coming before the 28th meeting? And where does that set us with
I
precedent?
apologize, Adam. I would have misspoke.
Okay,
There was
thank
an
you.
agreement with the parties and the concerned individuals on the
Thank you.
files.
Okay,
Nothing. This is all above board, I promise.
not to worry. Thank you.
The next item is PB 15.4, 355 Adelaide Street West, alterations and demolition to heritage attributes at a designated property under Section 33 and 34.11 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement. There is a presentation from Heritage Planning staff available if the board would like to hear the presentation. There is also a confidential attachment to this item, and if there are any questions about the confidential information, then we will meet in a closed section. Would anyone like to hold this item?
I have, sorry, yeah, it's Wendy
Wendy.
here. Yeah, I'm not able to download the confidential attachment. And if we have staff here, I don't mind if the staff can give a 1 or 2 minute very brief about the recommendation.
So
Thank
we
you.
will hold this item and move forward. Thanks, Wendy. The next item is, and I think what we'll do, and we'll get to the end, is we have a few items with confidential attachments, and we'll put them all together at the very end of the agenda, just for the sake of timeliness. For the next item is PB 15.5, 350 Bloor Street East, demolition of a designated heritage property with conditions. There are public speakers registered on this item, so it will be held. The next item is PB 15.6, 191 to 199 College Street and 74 to 76 Henry Street. Alterations to designated heritage properties under Part 4, Section 33 of the Ontario Heritage Act and authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement. There are public speakers on this item, so it will be held. Next is PB 15.7, 137 Roxborough Drive, alterations to a designated heritage property in the North Rosedale Heritage Conservation District. It's a refusal, and there are public speakers on this item, so it will be held. Next is PB 15.8, 38 Walmer Road, alterations to and demolition of heritage attributes and demolition of buildings on a designated heritage property. It's a refusal. There is a presentation from Heritage Planning staff available if the board would like to hear it. Would anyone like to hold this item? Seeing none, would somebody like to move the recommendations within this report? Wendy. Yes, Wendy.
Sorry, I just, well, sorry, this is my second meeting, and so I'm not sure about the procedure. So when you talk about like to move, so do you mean that we will not have chance to ask questions?
If you have questions and would like to have questions of staff, then we can hold the item. But if there are no questions going forward at this point, we can adopt the recommendations in the report.
Okay, so because I just have like this term for the refusal, the term just in general, because there's like a couple of them for today's meeting, I'm just not sure about what that means in this context for that.
We can absolutely hold the item for questions.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Next is PB 15.9, 374, 376, and 378 Yonge Street, refusal of application for alterations to designated heritage properties under Part 4, Section 33 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There are speakers on this item, so it will be held. Next is PB 15.10, 49 and 51 Yonge Street, alterations to heritage properties, demolition of heritage attributes, and authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement. There is a presentation from Heritage Planning staff available if the board would like to hear the presentation. Would anyone like to hold this item? Adam. Then we have PB 15.11, 625 Yonge Street, including 627, 629, 631, 633, 635, and 637 Yonge Street, and 1, 3, and 5 Isabella Street. Alterations to a heritage property and authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement. There are public speakers registered on this item, so it will be held. Then we have PB 15.12, 415 Broadview Avenue, alterations to and demolition of heritage attributes of a designated property and authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement, a request for directions. We have a presentation from Heritage Planning staff available if we would like to hear it. There is a confidential attachment to this item, and if there are questions about this confidential information, then the board will need to meet in closed section. Would anyone like to hold this item? Jeff. And then finally, we have PB 15.13, 1779 to 1787 Bayview Avenue, official plan and zoning bylaw amendment and site plan control application, heritage matters. There is a presentation from Heritage Planning staff available if the board would like to hear the presentation. There is a confidential attachment to this item, And if there are questions about the confidential information, then the board will need to meet in closed section. Would anyone like to hold this item? Wendy, would you like to hold it?
So the with host, that means we'll have opportunity to ask question from the staff, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So you'd like to hold it? Just to be
Yes.
clear? Perfect. Okay. There we go. So now we are going to go back to PB 15.2.
I'm going to mute myself and turn my camera off for the conflict.
Sure. I'm just waiting for the presentation, but in the interim, through the chair, good morning, members of the board, Madam Chair. My name is Clint Robertson, and I'm a heritage planner with the City of Toronto in policy and research. This morning, I'll be presenting item PB 15.2, 6 and 8 Cawthra Square, Notice of Intention to Designate a Property under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide, please. As can be seen in the location map on this slide, the subject properties are located mid-block on the north side of Cawthra Square, between Jarvis and Church Streets, and between Barber Hall Park to the west and the 1891 George Gooderham Mansion to the east. Next slide. Each of the two properties shown here were constructed concurrently in 1892. The properties are constructed of red brick and detailed with stone and display Queen Anne Revival style design. In May 2023, the city received an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment application to demolish the properties from 2 to 12 Cawthra Square to permit the development on the site of a 45-story residential building. Subsequently, 6 and 8 Cawthra Square were listed on the City of Toronto's Heritage Register on July 19, 2023, along with the 1901 duplex at 10 to 12 Cawthra Square. Although the application as originally made shows the demolition of the houses in their plan, the applicant has subsequently proposed to retain the front portions of 6 and 8 Cawthra Square, and staff is working with the applicant to see portions of these properties retained, although the application has not been revised accordingly. In balancing redevelopment and its associated benefits with heritage conservation and a goal of achieving conservation of 6 and 8 Cawthra Square, Heritage Planning staff is not pursuing designation of the 1901 duplex at 10 to 12 Cawthra Square, which was listed on the Heritage Register July 19, 2023, concurrently with 6 and 8 Cawthra Square. Heritage Planning has subsequently conducted research and evaluation for the properties at 6 and 8 Cawthra Square and determined that each building meets Ontario Regulation 906 for design, physical value, historical, and contextual values. Next slide, please. Each property has historical associative value for recalling the socioeconomic and development history of the immediate and broader area, surviving as two of only a dwindling number of residences in the Church Wellesley area. Accordingly, the properties have historical value for yielding or having the potential to yield information that contributes to an understanding of the community. When originally developed, the area was one of the most desirable in the city, with the main corridors of Jarvis Church and Sherbourne Streets containing grand houses and the intermediate streets comprising many substantial but less grand houses such as these. Properties such as 6 and 8 Cawthra Square originally attracted the professional classes, including managers and business owners, as outlined in the associated report. Next slide, please. The properties also possess contextual value for helping to define, maintain, and support the character of the area. Cawthra Square was developed as an upscale residential enclave between two of the city's grandest streets, Jarvis and Church Streets. The high quality materials and design of the subject properties, combined with them being an integral component of houses making up the north side of the street, help to define, maintain, and support the character of the street. Additionally, the property helps to define, maintain, and support the historic late 18th and early 1900s character of the broader area. The block bounded by Cawthra Square, Church, Gloucester, and Jarvis Streets, contains the highest concentration of heritage register properties in the Church Wellesley Village area, including the designated 1891 George Gooderham House at the corner of Cawthra Square and Jarvis Street. Next slide, please. Finally, each property possesses design value for being a unique example of Queen Anne Revival style residential architecture due to their quality materials and distinctive design. Shown here is the house at 6 Cawthra Square. The characteristic use of various wall textures, asymmetrical facade, and dominant front bay and gable stylistically defines the house. However, the generous use of stone, spacious detached form, and its irregular and picturesque gable on hip roofline sets them apart from many other Queen Anne Revival style houses in Toronto. Next slide. Shown here is the house at 8 Cawthra Square. Both houses once featured elaborate and exuberant spindlework barge boards, gable screens, and veranda friezes, as well as cresting and on the verandas and roof ridge. Originally, the high-quality materials with elaborate spindlework, cresting, and detailing, combined with the distinctive roof lines, mark these houses as being more refined than the more typical Queen Anne Revival-style houses to line Toronto streets. While number 6 has seen its verandas removed, number 8 retains its veranda, albeit with the detailing removed. Notably, however, the rear veranda retains much of the original spindlework detail. The houses retain significant integrity and continue to stand apart from many Queen Anne Revival style houses in Toronto. Therefore, since each property meets each of the 3 criteria categories under Ontario Regulation 906, staff are recommending the designation of 6 and 8 Cawthra Square under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Clint. We have a speaker registered on this item. Is he here? I think with Paul Farrelly, are we set to?
Paul is here. Maybe just call Paul's name there.
Yes, Paul, are you ready to speak? And if so, you can put your video on.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Thank you very much.
So just before you get started, just because it's the spiel, you will have 5 minutes, and getting close to the end of it, I will indicate that your time is nearly up.
Yeah, I don't think I'll take that long.
All right, please proceed then.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and members of the Toronto Preservation Board. I'm chair of the Development Committee of the Church Wellesley Neighborhood Association. And we're very distressed at the non-inclusion of 10 to 12 Cawthra Square listed on the Heritage Register in July 19, 2023, concurrently with 6 and 8 Cawthra Square. All of the attributes of 6 and 8 Cawthra Square exist in 10 to 12 Cawthra Square, but they're just not here in this report. And there's a phrase in there, or a sentence in there, in balancing redevelopment and its associated benefits with heritage conservation and a goal of achieving conservation of 6 and 8 Cawthra Square, heritage planning staff is not pursuing designation of the 1901 duplex at 10 to 12 Cawthra Square. The presentation just showed a map from 1893 from the Atlas. Conveniently, because 10 to 12 Cawthra Square is not there because it didn't get built till 1901. It's unbelievable, really. Heritage evaluation is supposed to evaluate heritage, not get involved in demolition, because essentially this statement is essentially going to approve the demolition of 10 to 12 Cawthra Square. And it has significant heritage attributes. It's a very, it's an unbelievable decision here. And we really have got to get a motion at Toronto Community Council to get 10 to 12 Cawthra Square evaluated. Because if you evaluate it, you're definitely going to get the attributes, the same attributes as 6 and 8. And you're talking here about a tower going into the most heritage intense section of our entire area. With it's designated neighborhood, so planning is sort of jumping over itself to make it a mixed use area where there's not a tall building in anywhere around, and basically, as I say, advocating the demolition of 10 to 12 Cawthra Square. It really needs to be evaluated, because if you were doing the heritage under the Heritage Act, the Heritage Act is not saying what you're achieving on development. It's a year-old heritage impact assessment that the developer has put in. He wanted to demolish the buildings right off the bat, and it's a flip job here, because the developer hasn't sold the houses or hasn't bought the houses. All of these people are hanging in there for 18 months now on a conditional basis, and heritage planning is giving them a free ride. It's really bad for our neighborhood. It's bad for heritage, and I really pray that you will reconsider this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Do we have questions of our speaker? Seeing none. Oh, yes, Bob. You're muted, Bob.
I think, given Paul's statement, what I was going to ask is probably trivial by comparison, but I wonder in the designation if there's anything said about the relationship, excuse me, the relationship between the building and the street. It seems to me that the fences that now define the lot edge to the street represent a different kind of transition between public and private, that when the houses were first built indicates an open lawn, and that the porch itself provided the kind of portal between public and private. And I'm wondering if what the staff feels about that within the designation report.
Well, I can't see it in the report, Robert, and it's a very good question, because this was originally part of the Granite Club, and there was a lacrosse field in where Barbara Hall Park is now. But
it was really a question of staff.
Yeah, I think, thank you very much, Paul, for sort of stepping in. But I think to Bob's point, I think this one, let's direct this to Clint.
Sure, but I'm afraid I'm not sure what the question is. Can you rephrase the question?
Okay. My observation, looking at your images, is that there's been a change in the relationship between the designated building, or the proposed designated building, and the street, where once the porches provided the transition between public and private, we now see fences along the back of the sidewalk. In one case, an archway defining the entrance to to the private territory. And I wonder if the designation would respond in any way to that consideration.
So through the chair, the porch where it exists on number 8 is a heritage attribute. So we would like to see that conserved. And the applicant would undoubtedly be restoring the porches on number 6 as well. The fence doesn't have any heritage value, so we did not include it. But should the development proceed and conservation is achieved on 6 and 8, I would fully expect them to restore the porches.
So do I understand from that then the designation would not include any description of the way that the houses relate to the street, the public sidewalk and carriageway?
Through the chair, I'm just going back to see what I have stated for the heritage attributes vis-a-vis citing. I mean, one of the heritage attributes is the building's placement on Cawthra Square, with similar setbacks and orientation to the street as the other historic houses in the block. So the placement of the house relative to the sidewalk, relative to the street, is a heritage attribute. So I don't see that changing. So yeah, I think that is captured, the relationship, the historic relationship in the heritage attributes.
But so that the fences that exist on the back of the sidewalk have no heritage attribute?
No.
Any other questions? Wendy?
Yeah, just quick questions, kind of follow up. So my understanding, this one is to recommend puts 8 and 6 into designated N. And so what is covered, if I use the plain language, so that will be more like the exterior and the porch. So, and so that is what staff were recommending. Right, and but having the public speaker referring to the history, and thank you very much for the informations, as I have been being note a little bit about the neighborhood, and I know this is maybe not within this item, but what the speaker said about with other numbers. So I know that is like development for the future will be like number 2 to 12, the whole block. And just like the speaker we mentioned, like other 10 to 12 with the similar features. So maybe not for this item. Is that any possibility, or what will be the procedure to consider to put the other numbers also into the designated heritage? Because I see number 2 is a very great, like, it will be a shame, in my opinion, with only able to like put designated like what we're proposing 6 to 8, but why not the other number within 2 to 12 block? Thank you. Maybe not in this item.
So number 2 to 4 does not have heritage value. It may be the coach house from the Gooderham mansion, but greatly changed and moved on the site. So it's been altered beyond recognition. 10 to 12, we did research, and 10 to 12 does have heritage value, but as the report points out, we've made a strategic decision to pursue just the designation of 6 and 8. The waiver that we have for these properties expires May the 1st. So a decision by council has to be made prior to then. And so, so to meet that deadline, we're just proceeding with 6 to 8 at this time. Again, it's not necessarily that 10 to 12 doesn't have heritage value, but we've made the decision that 6 and 8 is what we're pursuing. The developer is unwilling to conserve 10 to 12.
Jeff?
I
Thank you.
consider this to be quite concerning. My question is, what do you mean by a waiver here? I mean, we have 2 listed properties here, well, 4 altogether, but the 6 and 8 and 10 to 12 were listed in July of 2023, 9 months ago. Why is there constraints on the city moving to designation on both, all 4 of these properties? There was wording in your report about a balance. I'm confused about why balance comes into this. The Toronto Preservation Board and Heritage Planning deals with heritage in terms of looking at the values of these properties. The development, that's a further step. Are we not on the same page here in terms of the role of heritage in these applications?
I see Anne has appeared, so I'm going to, I think, direct the question towards her.
So the reason why we are moving forward with the designation of just 2 properties on this site, we are not disputing the heritage values of the other properties. This is essentially, as Clint said, this is a strategic decision based on, we've had negotiations with the development application, and it has been a complicated negotiation, and this is where we've arrived at in terms of the negotiation. So this is why we are making our recommendation. This is as a response to the negotiation of this particular development application. So that is the answer to your question. We're not saying that those other properties do not have heritage value. We're saying this is where we've landed with our negotiations on this particular application.
Why are we not moving forward with designation on these properties? We had the same timing involved, presumably from July of last year till March of this year. Why did we not move forward with designation on all 4 of the properties? The point is, it's not just 2 properties and 2 properties. It forms a streetscape, the integrated nature of Cawthra Square there. Whereas if you only retain the 1 property or the 2 properties, you've lost that nature of the streetscape.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not disputing anything you're saying, Jeff. What I'm saying is this is where we've landed, as we are in negotiation with a development application, and this is where we've landed in this particular application, having to take into account our negotiations, the views of the council, the views of residents that we've heard. We've taken into account all of those things, considering potential appeals in the future. But this is where we've landed here. I'm not disputing what you're saying at all, but this is what staff are currently recommending.
Well, I find it very unsatisfactory, frankly. I don't know what other people on the board think. I'll be interested to hear what other people think.
So we'll continue with our questions of staff, and then we'll have ample time that we can discuss this issue amongst one another, because it is a big one. Are there other questions of staff at this time? Paul.
Just it hangs in the air, but I think for purpose of getting to the discussion, it may be appropriate to just say it over again. The significance of getting to the council in May is that we are up against the timelines of the act, And we will, is it true to say that we will lose the ability to designate even 6 and 8 if we don't apply that timeline, given that the waiver is going to expire?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, that is the case. We have to bring designations forward to the next council meeting following this TPB, or we won't be able to designate.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions of staff? Bob, is that question?
I think it's more to do with a discussion rather than a question. I'm getting agitated here. I want to get on the discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
We will move on. Thank you very much. This is, we'll open it up for discussion, and I'll say this is very complicated because what we have before us is a designation for 2 very good properties, but there's clearly a larger, as Paul said, an elephant in the room here. So whoever, discussion amongst ourselves. Bob?
Well, I mean, I think we've made it very clear. The questions have already made it very clear. This is not a satisfactory arrangement that we confront here. That the other buildings on that street admittedly have heritage value. Then why are they not part of this same package? It seems like it's been some kind of negotiation that's produced this result, which is not satisfactory in relation to the heritage questions. So I don't know what we do with this now. If we refuse it, then we're if we don't accept staff's recommendation, then that's not very helpful. But we're missing 2 important buildings, it appears, within this designation, so within this report. So I will need some. I think we need to discuss how we're going to handle this. What seems to me an egregious misuse of the process.
No, it puts us between a rock and a hard place where we want to do right by 2 properties, but there are other issues sort of at play here. Other further discussion? Paul?
I just wanted to say what was very compelling for me was in the presentation when we saw the map of the area, and just about all the other properties that you saw on the map had heritage status. So it's very clear that whatever development comes is going to be hugely intrusive to this block, to this area. And in a perfect world, in using hindsight, it would have been a lot better if heritage staff had a mandate to negotiate with all the properties designated on the street. We're behind a rock and a hard place, and you don't always get what you want. But I guess the post-mortem for me, the question to ask is, did we go about getting the right negotiation in place? Because I would certainly have supported a designation of all the properties, and that might have led to a different outcome of whatever's being negotiated with the development application. So that's just a lot of coulda, woulda, shoulda, I know, but that's just my sentiment on the thing. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Paul. Wendy?
Sorry, I just want to have a very quick understanding about the law here. So just now the staff mentioned about that is let's say 10 to 12. That is not the developer not willing to preserve, and so I understand also from Anne's mention that I can stand is like a very difficult, tough negotiation in these preservations like work, and just if in that case, if developer not willing to preserve, and that is the buildings, any buildings or premise that is not designated, that is really in terms of the law, that is nothing that you can do about it to the developer, right?
Is that a question for staff?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so
Question for the staff.
we're gonna flow a little bit backwards, and we'll put that to staff to answer, please, and thank you.
Thank you.
So through you, Madam Chair, the recent changes to Heritage Act have put time when a development application comes in, we have a certain number of days in which we can designate the property from when the development application was made complete. The developer can give waivers to that timeline, or the property owner can give waivers to that timeline. In this case, they have waived the timeline until May the 1st this year. So we have until May the 1st to get a designation through for properties that are included in this development application site. If we don't get the designation issued by May the 1st, then we cannot designate them. That doesn't mean, we can't negotiate, conservation or commemoration or other things as part of the development application of these properties, but we just can't use designation as one of the tools if the properties aren't designated by May the 1st, or the notice of intention to designate has not been issued by May the 1st. That's technically what we have to do. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Other discussion amongst board members? Jeff, you had a hand up before.
I'm willing to make a motion if you want to entertain a motion.
To amend the recommendations.
Yes.
Can everybody see the amendment? And so it's that the Toronto Preservation Board recommend that City Council request the Senior Manager Heritage Planning to explore options to seek some conservation of the buildings at 10 and 12 Cawthra Square as part of this current zoning bylaw amendment applications for the properties at 2 to 12 Cawthra Square. So I think what we need to do is we discuss the amendment, then we'll vote to adopt the amendment. And then we have to adopt we'll move for the recommendations of staff as amended. So there's a couple of steps here. Bob?
Well, I'm not quite sure how, if these properties are not designated, then what opportunities there are to impose conservation on these buildings. It seems to me we have to have them designated, and we have to have them designated by May 1. So why are we hanging around here? Why don't we just get on with it?
Very good question. Matthew?
I think, obviously I'll join the chorus of saying, that the other two buildings have heritage value, but I think some of the, not confusion, but the issue at hand is that we're seeing this negotiation come much earlier than we have in other times. And I think saying what we would like to hope for, say that all these properties are designated, but then coming down the line when we'll see an application for alterations, we're just going to have the same sort of question again, where two of the properties are proposed for some retention, and the other two are simply going to be recommended for demolition. So we're only sort of delaying the inevitable, let's say. And we sort of already know what's going to be coming ahead later on as part of the negotiation. It's just that right now we're seeing the negotiation happen before or in lack of the designation of those two buildings.
One could sort of see it to contribute to the discussion here that as amended, barring designation, which we have been informed is just not going forward, that this shows the will of the TPD that conservation is strongly recommended for these properties and attempting to find a means forward in order to empower them, going forward. So, it's perhaps faint, but it's at least better than nothing. Other discussion of the proposed amendment?
I guess the question of the board is it that good enough for us? Should we be compromising? Staff clearly have, and I think we need to straighten that out.
Mitchell, you had something to contribute, and then we'll go to Jeff.
Well, a question for staff, and it's a two-parter. Would the amendment that's been proposed put at risk the designation of these two properties? And then the second part of that question is, if that is the case, you mentioned commemoration as a strategy. Like, is there opportunity still to work with the developer to, let's say, sculpt the podium to kind of relate in scale to the remainder of the neighborhood? That's it.
Do you want me to answer that?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
yeah. So the first question was, does passing this motion hinder potential designation? That's the first pass. So in answer to that, the recommendations that, each of the recommendations in the staff report, are separate. And if you recommend to council that the properties at 6 to 8 are designated, hopefully, council will designate those properties. If you have a separate motion about 10 to 12, then council consider that motion separately. So adding another motion doesn't compromise the ability to negotiate 6 to 8. With regard to your other point, I'm not part of the negotiation team on this application, so I can't tell you where the negotiations are actually going. The motion you have put forward is directing staff to really seek what options we have, seek hard to see whether we could include some conservation of 10 to 12. And staff will look at that as part of the negotiations, and they will tell the developer, can we see whether we can include some conservation here, or if not conservation, we will try to seek some commemoration. I don't know where the negotiations are now, how meaningful that would be, but when the development application, the heritage approvals under the Heritage Act come back to you, you will be able to see that and pass motions accordingly. Did that answer your question? It was a bit long-winded.
Yeah, that did. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jeff?
Just to clarify that I'm not yet making the motion. I simply, the staff had drawn up a motion in anticipation of, since there was discussion prior to the meeting. My question is whether, given now we understand a little bit better about the waiver and the May 1 deadline, the nature of that, and the province's constrained timelines on Ontario Heritage Act. And my question is going back, is there time of staff to bring forward a heritage designation proposal for 10 and 12 Cawthra Square? Like, we have a meeting on March 28th. Things can go direct to Planning and Housing Committee and still meet a council deadline, a council meeting in May. I'm just wondering, is it impossible to bring this forward for designation? 10 and 12?
Through you, Madam Chair, again, that this is so we have this strict timeline under the Heritage Act, and the question is whether or not we could prepare a notice of intention to designate in that time. Staff have only recommended the designation of these 2 properties on the site, partly because of it's partly in terms of a resources thing, whether or not we actually have the ability to do all the work to designate and to defend a designation at the OLT. So this is in part staff resources, given all the other development applications that we have to do, given all the other designations that we have to do. So this is in part, we have only designated 2 for that reason, because we do not have the time or the resources to actually put into designating these particular properties at this time.
So the answer is no to Jeff's question.
Well,
Yes.
it's extremely discouraging. That's very sad. I mean, the properties are so similar, you know.
Right.
It's-
And you've already acknowledged the fact that they have heritage qualities.
Yeah, and they were both listed at the same time with similar attributes. I find it very not satisfactory at all.
I think that's one thing we're all in agreement about, that this is a very rummy situation, to put it very mildly. Kurosh?
Sorry, I just want to know that if they are included as a designation, a heritage designation, and the developer wants to continue their work in future, we will be facing demolition with condition. I just want to see the future of this building. You know, we will save the porches and the facade, and then they will demolish the rest of the part of the building. Is this the future? If they are included in the heritage designation, or is this their future? You know, I just want to know that what we are saving right now, the whole property or just the facade of the building, and then if they will continue, they negotiate and they want to develop, you know, their work and construction, what will the future of this this 2 land or other portions?
I will send that over to staff. Please and thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, the designation isn't about preventing development or preventing change, it's about managing it. So as we negotiate the development application, we will understand the heritage values and attributes of these particular properties, and we will take those into account as part of the negotiation. When development applications come through, there are always almost always alterations to heritage buildings, and we will consider those, and an application for alterations and or removal of heritage attributes will come forward for you to review at some time in the future.
Thank you. Is there further discussion amongst ourselves, apart from, you know, our expressions of feelings of like just acute frustration? We have what could be an amendment before us that we're sort of discussing as a possible way forward. Is there any further discussion of the amendment? Seeing none, Jeff, do you feel comfortable? Would you like to move the amendment? Or we just proceed and we've discussed it and we don't?
Well, we have to take action. We either have to, I guess the other can try to make a motion that staff request staff to bring forward a designation assessment on 10 to 12 Cawthra Square, recognizing the constraints, timeline constraints on that designation, intent to designate.
So if that is your preferred course of action, then there's nobody moving sort of what has been presented.
And then we could say in the event that that's impossible, then, you know, the other option would be similar to the, right? I mean,
well, I think
can we have some discussion about this?
There's a couple. There are a couple of ways forward. We have what is before us, whether we want to do that, and that wouldn't present prevent even what you want to do. We can approve the amendment and move forward. And if Jeff, this is what you want to sort of do, then I would suggest that you work with Heritage Planning staff to develop it, and we'll table and then deal with everything at the very end when we have the wording clear. That would be perhaps the way forward. Does that make sense? And is that how you'd like to proceed? Yep. Okay.
Well,
Bob.
I don't think so. That's the way to proceed, frankly.
Okay.
I think the second option that Jeff just put forward is that we put a second motion that asks the designation of or a designation report from staff that would meet those deadlines. And that's the position of this board. Very clear. However, that's compromised later. I don't think we should speculate. We want that, I think, and we should ask for it.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that as well. I think ultimately staff will get the idea that the board was concerned enough, and if we fail on that, then in the subsequent negotiations they will still work to protect some conservation. That wording is very, very weak in relation compared with getting a designation of the property.
All right. So I think then you would like to bring up a separate motion, correct?
I will draft a separate motion.
Thank you, Jeff.
Just a question, I think, to sort of clerks and staff to make sure that I have procedurally what we need to do. Can that be separate from what we're doing now so that we can pass the designation of 6 to 8, or do they have to be together?
So if you're moving a motion on 10 to 12, that is, it's connected to the item that you're on, PB 15.2, just because it's part of the report as well. So it's appropriate to move a motion on PB 15.2. As I understand it, that I think we misunderstood during who was speaking and maybe questioning and so forth earlier. So as I understand it now, there is no motion placed currently. So there isn't really a second motion. So I think what we want to do is to kind of clarify whatever the motion or motions will be or are actually being placed. So I guess my advice is maybe hold the item down.
Perfect. That's where I thought we were going.
Yeah. And then the idea is that we would we'll place the motion, you can vote on it, and we'll go from there later on.
So I think, Jeff, as you work through what you would like to have, let's hold this item until the end or later on in the meeting so that we can continue sort of moving forward. Does that sound good to everybody? All right. Thank you very much to staff. We are now on to bring up my handy dandy script. We are now
live back on camera.
Yes, you are.
Okay.
We are now on to item 4, which is at Adelaide. As I just sort of move through, I've got screens open everywhere, everybody, so just bear with me. Oh, we're at PB 15.3, sorry. 346 Youngs. Oh, no, this was just word. I'm with it. I swear, everybody, I'm with it. We're on to PB 15.4. 355 Adelaide Street West, alterations and demolition to heritage attributes at a designated property under section 33 and 34.11 of the Ontario Heritage Act. This one has a confidential attachment. So I will remind my fellow board members that anything within the confidential motion we cannot discuss publicly. So that we have a public presentation, and then if need be, we'll move into a closed session. I had sort of talked about doing that later, but we have a lot of moving pieces and a lot of issues, and we've now just held an item. So we're going to proceed, I think, as planned, just for the sake of some continuity.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I think there was also some concern that certain members of the board were not able to even access the confidential attachments,
That is
which
why
may lead to
the
some issues as well.
That is why we've held the item.
Thank you.
And then if we can move into the closed session, if
Yep.
we need to discuss those confidential items and ask questions of staff about those.
Okay.
But for now, we have this public portion. Let's please proceed.
Hi, good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Toronto Preservation Board. I'm Ragini Dayal. I'm the Heritage Planner with the Development Review Team working on this file. So this, as you've mentioned, this is a confidential report that contains advice or communication subject to solicitor-client privilege and contains information regarding potential litigation. Next slide, please. What I can show you is the development site. That's an L shape that's, you can see on your screen is outlined in a dashed blue outline, and the red portion is actually 355 Adelaide Street West, which contains the Heritage Building. Next slide, please. This is an aerial view that shows the site bounded by Adelaide Street West, Charlotte Street to the east, and Oxley to the south. Next slide, please. These are photographs of the existing Heritage Building. It's designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The principal north elevation is the first image, and the second image shows the principal north and the side or east elevation. And the third image shows the side or west elevation, and the rear, which is the south elevation. Next slide, please. I will just read out a short statement before concluding. The owner appealed its zoning bylaw amendment application for its development site at 353 to 355 Adelaide Street West, 46 Charlotte Street, and 16 Oxley Street to the Ontario Land Tribunal in 2023. And in February of that year, the applicant revised its zoning bylaw application that includes a mixed-use tower. The Heritage Building continues to be incorporated into the proposed development and is now the subject of the appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal. The focus of the report is the owner's application under the Ontario Heritage Act, which requests City Council's consent to alterations and demolition of heritage attributes to the property at 355 Adelaide Street West, which you just saw. Council requires the advice of the TPB in respect to matters which may impact a designated heritage property. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have no speakers on this item and it's been held. Before we just proceed, are there any questions about the public portion? So just what we've heard for staff. Seeing none, we need to do a motion to move into closed session to hear. Yes, Bob. Are you moving to move us forward? Yeah, yes, Matthew.
I couldn't hear Bob, first of all.
Yes, my motion is to go into closed session.
Okay. So, Madam Chair, if we can take a vote, please, just to meet in closed session.
Can I have so Bob's moved it, all in favor of moving into closed session? Perfect, in favor.
Okay, sorry, and this is to meet in closed session to consider item PB 15.4. Okay, so we will recess the meeting. We will need to just give us a few minutes here to move some of the staff and public into the lobby. Yeah, I just see right now we're locking the meeting and we're starting to pause things and so forth as well. So just give us a couple minutes, Chair, and I'll let you know when we're ready to proceed.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
If I could just ask,
Perfect. Are we good to go then?
yes, so we'll just take the screenshot down here. And 11:13 a.m. Madam Chair, you can resume your public session.
Thank you very much. So we have item PB 15.4 before us with recommendations. Does anybody choose to move this report? I will move the report. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Moving on now to PB 15.5. 350 Bloor Street East, demolition of a designated heritage property with conditions. We have a staff report. Does anybody care to hear the staff report? Just holler. Wendy, okay. So thank you very much. We will listen to the staff report.
Hi, it's me again, Ragini Dayal for Heritage Planning. So as you can see, this is 350 Bloor Street East, demolition of a designated heritage property with conditions. Next slide, please. The location map, this is a Rogers building that is located on the north side of Bloor Street East and with an on-ramp to Mount Pleasant Road to the west or the left in your image, and the Rosedale Valley to the north. Next slide, please. With the aerial view, you can see the valley a little bit more clearly here. Next slide, here, please. And here's a view of the primary elevation of 350 Bloor Street East that's taken across from Bloor in the upper slide. And a view looking northeast showing the south and west elevations of 350 Bloor Street East. The existing 6-story building was built into the upper portion of the Rosedale Valley Ravines South Embankment in 1968 to 1970 to the designs of renowned modernist architect John C. Parkin. It is a significant representative example of architectural precast concrete in Toronto. It features an identical expression on its principal, the south elevation, west and north elevations, with the precast concrete cladding creating wedge-shaped columns and deep inset window openings above a recessed transparent base. The property is designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and the precast concrete cladding panels are identified as heritage attributes of the building. In August of 2022, the city received an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment application related to the proposed redevelopment of the subject property. The proposal seeks to permit a 63-story mixed-use building on the subject site. And at the time of the application was made, it was to include 675 residential units. The application proposes to demolish the historic Parkin building to facilitate this development. To mitigate the loss of this designated building, the proposal includes a commemoration strategy that would include constructing the podium of the new building to replicate the appearance of the original building, including the reuse of the original precast concrete panels on its south, west, and north facades, with partial reconstruction on the on the east. Next slide, please. This is a view of the north elevation that faces onto the ravine. And then the lower image is of the southwest corner of the building, showing the east elevation that has a predominantly a blank wall. Next slide, please. Now, demolition of a heritage building is not normally supported by staff. In this case, options to conserve and incorporate parts of the original park and building in a new building on the site were sought. Structural issues and construction access constraints prevented meaningful conservation of the existing building in a way that retained the integrity of the original building within a redevelopment site that includes a tower and additional housing. The cultural heritage value and heritage attributes of this park and building are directly tied to the non-structural precast cladding that is connected with concealed anchors to the building's perimeter beams. What this image is showing is what areas are to be salvaged, which are in the purple cross-hatched base of the tower. And you can see the south elevation on the upper left, the north elevation, and then the west elevation at the bottom right. Next slide, please. So these panels are proposed to be cataloged, removed, and later reattached to the structural frame of a new building. This slide shows the detail of the existing column above and the existing sill below. Cladding identified is in purple will be reinstated with the sill and soffit shown in red, replaced with new elements. This is a commemoration strategy, not conservation, but the modular and repeatable aspects of the building's design would enable the new building to honor the heritage values and attributes of the original building. It also supports the character and sense of place of this portion of Bloor Street East, which includes many 20th century commercial and office buildings of distinctive high-quality design, including a number of mid-century modern buildings. Next slide, please. Okay, this is showing the ground floor plan of the proposed tower development with the residential areas shown in pink and the non-residential areas in blue. Next slide, please. This is the second floor plan showing the interior layout. Next slide, please. This is the proposed 8th level that is above the heritage building on the roof of it, and this is an amenity floor. The step backs of the proposed tower above the reconstructed podium are sufficient to ensure the scale, form, and massing of the original 6-story building, ensure that it would be visually prominent from the public realm. Next slide, please. This is a north-south section. The design of the form, fenestration pattern, and material palette of the proposed new tower is intended to complement that of the reconstructed podium with the deep set windows and tiered massing. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a view of the south and west elevations of the proposed development. And you can see the reconstructed 6-story building forming the base of the new tower. Next slide, please. This is a view of the north, the ravine side of the building, and the east elevations to the right. Next slide, please. This is an illustration of the view of the new proposal along Bloor Street. Next slide, please. And this is aerial views of the project looking southwest with the reconstruction of the heritage building enlarged on the lower in the lower view. Although the historic John C. Parkin building at 350 Bloor Street East is proposed to be demolished, staff are supportive of this scheme in the context of a broad planning framework that considers the heritage issues as well as other city and area priorities, which include increasing the housing supply and providing affordable housing. Structural issues and construction access constraints prevent meaningful conservation of the existing building as part of the development that would provide a significant increase in housing including some affordable housing at the site. Instead, the park and building is proposed to be commemorated through construction of a new building with a podium that reflects all the heritage values and attributes of the original building. The commemoration strategy also allows for the reuse of the original large precast spandrels and wedge-shaped columns that are the most prominent and idiosyncratic attributes of the original building. The commemorative strategy also allows for the reuse, sorry, I did say that. This comprehensive commemoration approach would also ensure the new building appropriately supports the sense of place of this part of Bloor Street East. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much. That's very detailed, and thank you. So again, it's saying about this will become the 63 storage.
Oh, sorry, Wendy. We've had
Yes.
a staff report. We have speakers on this item, so we need to proceed
Oh,
there first.
okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
We have registered on this item. And are they ready to go? And or do we have a presentation from them, or are you here to answer questions? Because I see, if I pull up my handy dandy speaker screen, we have from ERA Architects, Ruri Poncherini Architects, Facet Group, and the Osmington Gorofsky Development Corps. Are you here to, we can go in order, or are you here for questions, I guess is my question of my speakers today.
Hi, Madam Chair. It's Brendan McCabe from ERA Architects. I'll be doing a brief presentation for the client group, and then the remainder of us will be on the call for any questions the board may have.
Fantastic. Then Brendan, you have 5 minutes. When you get close to the end of your time, I will give you an indication that it's nearly up. And so when you're set, by all means, please start.
Sure. Can everyone see my screen okay there? Okay.
Yep, you're good.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Brendan McCabe, and I'm a project manager at ERA Architects. At the request of Heritage Planning staff, I'd like to take a few minutes today to provide the board with some further background information on how and why we developed this unique commemoration and reinstatement scheme in front of you today. This project has been a major collaborative effort between the project team and Heritage Planning staff since inception, and we'd really like to thank them for their efforts in helping develop what we believe is a rather creative, albeit novel approach for the conservation and adaptive reuse of this John C. Parkin building. A quick summary of the process so far is up on the screen. Importantly, following designation, minor investigative alterations were approved by the board and undertaken by our colleagues at Facet Group in November 2023. These investigations inform the strategy before you today and are detailed in the HIA submitted February 14th, 2024. As presented by staff, the proposed development will conserve the massing form and rhythm of the south, west, and north elevations of the existing building, while allowing for the construction of a multi-story residential tower designed by Ruri Poncherini Architects. The existing precast spandrel panels and wedge columns will be carefully disassembled, salvaged, and reinstated on a new podium volume, while the east elevation, which is currently a blank wall, will be removed and replaced to match. The proposed tower is set back above all elevations of the podium, ensuring the original massing and scale of the building is conserved. The existing building is being converted to residential use with approximately 1 floor of affordable units and new commercial and community uses at grade to enhance the building's interface along Bloor Street East. The existing colonnade of wedge-shaped concrete columns along the southwest and northwest corner of the building will be reinstated, in addition to the floor-to-ceiling glazing with dark metal framing. Per the city's heritage policies and the standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada, in situ retention and rehabilitation is the preferred method for ensuring conservation of significant built resources and was thoroughly explored prior to developing the scheme before you today. However, this site and specific building present a number of unique constraints that, following weeks of engineering studies, deemed in situ retention and rehabilitation unfeasible. Namely, new tower foundations require structural caissons and a new core to be located within the footprint of the existing building. Our consultant team explored a variety of structural and construction methods to minimize the potential impact should the building be retained. However, the required caissons and new core would impact roughly 65% of the GFA at all levels of the existing building, resulting in a less than viable floor plate. These alterations to the existing building would also impact its ability to support the retained facades and likely necessitate the temporary removal of select exterior cladding elements. Given the existing cladding is comprised of a combination of precast and cast-in-place elements, it would be difficult to seamlessly remove and restore certain exterior elements without damaging or impacting adjacent panels and the overall integrity of the building. The existing site conditions also impacted the feasibility of in-situ retention. Nestled at the northeast corner of Bloor Street East and Mount Pleasant Road and abutting the TRCA regulated Rosedale Ravine to the north, the site is extremely constrained and not suited for the use of a typical outboard retention structure. For Facet Group's assessment, a roughly 7-meter zone would be required to accommodate a prefabricated skeletal framework to retain the existing south, west, and north elevations. As you can see on the site plan on the screen, this zone would encroach on the TRCA ravine lands to the north, require the closure of both the east and westbound bike lanes along Bloor Street East, and conflict with the Mount Pleasant Road ramp. Further, the required depth for the framework's foundation conflicts with the TTC subway tunnel along Bloor Street. Given the building's modular design and original construction method, it was determined that the salvage and reinstatement of original precast elements at 3 elevations on a new podium would more than adequately conserve the building's design value while allowing for the densification of a key site along the subway line. As mentioned, in November 2023, ERA and Facet Group undertook a number of investigations to detail the existing condition of the building, the way in which it was originally constructed, and to report on the feasibility and impact of the proposed reconstruction strategy. The existing precast wedge-shaped columns and spandrel panels shown in purple on this diagram will be carefully disassembled from the top floor down, salvaged, and reinstated onto the new podium. The existing soffits and sills, shown in red here, were confirmed, I just have one more slide, were confirmed to be cast in place and cannot be disassembled without significant damage. As such, these elements will be documented and replicated using like materials.
Thank you. You're at 5 minutes.
Sure, and then really I can leave it on this slide where we had just prepared this slide to show the proposed window strategy and the proposed balcony strategy, and a revised rendering here on the left-hand side that will show the minimal impact, visual impact that will have. We just couldn't get this rendering into the HIA.
Thank you very much.
In summary, the project represents months of interdisciplinary collaboration and a truly unique balance of heritage and planning objectives that we're very proud to have developed with city staff and present to you today. Thank you
very much, Brendan. Do we have questions of Brendan or the other speakers on the call who will sort of answer as a team? Alex.
Yes, just a quick question about the balcony strategy. I noticed that on most of the pictures you couldn't really see them at all. You could on the last one, barely. Are you planning to use glass railings to minimize the effect of the balconies?
Yes, the intention is to use a mixture of balcony guards with opaque panels that are roughly the same size as the existing spandrel panels that exist there, the dark metal ones, with a minor additional glass guard that will go above that to bring them up to the building code height. But the intention is to make them look essentially the same as the existing openings, but just a recessed balcony behind that.
Thank you.
Jeff, you had a question? You're muted, Jeff.
I just wondered whether there was anything else that Brendan wanted to inform us of but was cut off by the time. And secondly, how is this project best described? As a commemoration or as a reconstruction? I'm actually confused about that. It seems to be very close to the existing in what is being attempted to be produced here, but using a combination of old and new materials. So what is the correct terminology here?
I will defer to heritage staff on how they would like to describe this approach. In our mind, I guess it is we are comfortable with calling it a commemoration strategy, given the existing base building, if you will, beneath the cladding will be fully demolished to make way for a new base structure, a new core, and that it is select elements of the precast paneling, albeit we do believe that these contain the greatest extent of the design value for the building, that will be reinstated on the 3 elevations. And then of course there's some, it's really the most of what you see from the public realm will be reinstated, salvaged and reinstated. It is those sills though that were sills and soffits that were precast or cast in place when the building was constructed that cannot be salvaged. Our investigations confirmed that, and so those will need to be recast.
And was there anything else you wanted to tell us on the presentation? It was a very interesting presentation, by the way.
Thank you. I really just, I can provide, I had this slide and just like a brief paragraph on what the balcony and window strategy was. If you'd like me to run through that, I can reshare my screen and just read through that very quickly. So for this balcony strategy, so the shape and size of the existing windows will be conserved, and new units with dark metal frames to match the existing will be introduced. As the building will be converted to residential units, new window units will be operable and include a horizontal awning window similar to that shown at the bottom right of the screen. New recessed balconies will be introduced at the north elevation, which conserve the original punched openings and include dark metal and glass guards that match the windows and original metal details as shown in the top right of the screen. Additionally, louvers will need to be included at the top mechanical floor of the podium. However, these are intended to be constructed of a matching material to the reinstated precast elements and located at the northeast corner of the building to minimize their visibility from the public realm. And then, as I said, this render was prepared by HPA slightly after we submitted the HIA. We just couldn't get it in there in time, but I'd be happy to send this along through Heritage staff if you'd like a copy.
Thank you. Are there other questions of Brendan or the other speakers on the call?
I have a question, but it could be directed to either the Heritage consultants or staff, depending on who has the information available. I'm curious if this is a precedent-setting project with a brutalist structure in Toronto in terms of the disassembly and reassembly, and in terms of the adaptive reuse of a brutalist office building into residential, and whether it may pave the way forward for more preservation of brutalist structures within the city. Is this a precedent-setting one?
Yeah, I think it's a staff question.
Okay. I know ERA does have such a broad portfolio. I wasn't sure, but perhaps staff could answer it.
Through you, Madam Chair, staff do not normally support the demolition of designated buildings such as this. This is a very unique occurrence that's coming here, that we are supporting this. And this is a very unusual building type. Whenever we deal with these kind of buildings, we have to take a unique approach to each one of them. So this is the way we have managed to achieve this commemoration of the parking building here. So it's not conservation. There's no conservation here. It's commemorating it, and it's the presence of it within the street will still be felt, even though it's a reconstructed building. So is it precedent setting? We will certainly have developers trying to use this as a precedent, but we think this is a very unique situation. So if the similar unique things occur in the future, we don't know, but this is very unique, the way our response to this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just going to make sure there is no other questions of our speakers. And then I'll thank them for their time. And now other questions of staff. Seeing none, do we have discussions amongst ourselves about this item? I have a staff report with recommendations before us. Does anybody care to move the recommendations within the report? Robert, thank you. All those in favor, please. And the motion carries. Let us move on to PB.6. And I'm just going to bring this up here. 191 to 199 College Street and 74 to 76 Henry Street, alterations to designated heritage properties under Part 4, Section 33 of the Ontario Heritage Act. and authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement. As you see before, we can have the staff report. Would anybody like to hear the staff report? You're just pipe up. Adam does. Perfect. All right. Over to you, staff, please, and thank you.
It's Dan DiBartolo who's presenting this. Is he here?
You're the next contestant, Dan. Come on down, please.
I would suggest maybe we postpone this one and we'll try to find out where Dan is.
Perfect. Let's do that. Let us move then on to PB 15.7. I'm just scrolling down here. We have a communication on this file asking for a deferral. It cannot be done indefinitely, but
I'm unmuted. I'm sorry. I was having some technical difficulties. This is Dan DiBartolo for 15.6.
Well, okay, back to 15.6. Welcome, Dan.
Just give me 1 second. I was really frantic trying to get my WebEx to work properly. Okay, I am ready. Good morning, members of the board. Sorry for the technical difficulties just now experienced. My name is Dan DiBartolo of Heritage Planning staff. The item before you is a proposal per heritage permit application to alter the designated heritage properties and provide authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement for the properties at 191-199 College Street and 74 to 76 Henry Street. Next slide, please. The subject properties are located on the southwest corner of College and Henry Streets. Next slide, please. At the left, the College Street frontage, that's 191 to 199 College Street. At the right, you can see the Henry Street properties, 74 to 76 Henry Street. More detailed photos are included in your report. The properties are all designated under the Ontario Heritage Act and comprise part of a collection of surviving representative examples of late 19th century bay and gable semi-detached house-form buildings. In fact, all the properties were constructed within a very narrow time range, 1886-1887. Next slide, please. The proposal would construct a 31-story mixed-use tower on the subject site to provide 494 new dwelling units, of which 408 will be affordable housing, rental housing units. The scheme would retain the principal elevations of the heritage buildings at the site. Portions of the return walls, including the full east facade of 191 College Street, which is along Henry Street, would also be retained, while the rear wings of each building would be removed. Also note at the site, across the site, stucco would be removed, masonry repaired and restored. Elements such as woodwork and barge board and appropriate window types would also be repaired and reintroduced based on archival documentation. The mass above the College Street buildings would be stepped back 2 meters behind the retained roof ridge line. A cantilever of floors 5 and above would project forward by 2 meters above and behind the retained heritage building fabric on College Street. Please note that staff continue to have concern about the lowering of the ground floor level, specifically the visual impact this would have on the principal entrances and perception of the interior space as viewed from the exterior. Staff will continue to work with the applicant on this aspect. Next slide, please. Substantial portions of the heritage buildings at 74 to 76 Henry Street, which is in the left portion of the slide, would be retained in situ. There will be no massing above them, and only the rear portions are being removed. Next slide, please. This diagram shows the step backs of the tower above the heritage properties on College Street. In conclusion, staff is supportive of the conservation scheme and recommends approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. We have 2 speakers registered for this item. And we have George Trainey. Please correct me if I've said it incorrectly. And Sue Dexter. George, are you ready to speak to us? Matthew, I don't see him.
That's right, Madam Chair. I don't actually see George connected. What is our next speaker?
Then maybe Ms. Dexter.
I'm here.
Hi, Sue. You
How
have
you doing?
5.
How you?
I'm well. How are you?
Not bad, not bad. It's good to be among friends again.
Yes. So you've got 5 minutes on the clock. I
Terrific.
really don't like cutting people off. It's not my favorite thing.
No,
So you could...
I'm less than that. I'm less than that.
Perfect. The floor is yours.
So for those who don't know, I'm Sue Dexter on the board of Harvard Village Residents Association. Our catchment is Bloor, Bathurst College, and Spadina. I have to confess, I'm here out of what I hope may be a fortuitous coincidence, and ask your indulgence. I'll be brief. My heart goes out to Heritage staff. We have heard today limited resources, no staff, no possibility on files like COTHRA, and those files are business as usual. In the past couple of days, inspired by Heritage's announcement that the public may now be involved in designations, we've been looking at the listing materials produced by Heritage for the College Street study in 2017, and 19199 College was one. The reason for our interest was based on 2 facts. The entire catchment of HVRA is an MTSA. That means high intensity development to the newbies on the board. And we're now seeing development spread west of Spadina on both College and Bloor and Spadina. We have 50 listed buildings under threat. When we saw this item on 191 College before you, it was clear we were looking at history that cannot repeat itself. Same with the designations at 28189 College, which unlocked a wonderful part of Toronto cultural and built form history, including the beginnings of sterilization of milk, the Borden Dairy. Listing, challenge, designation is no longer a permitted route to heritage conservation, and we have only 9 months before the game is over. I've given you detail. We know what the College Street study produced in the way of listings. Overall, we have 50 listed properties in HVRA with 83 addresses. Think Knox Church, Brunswick House, Lord Lansdowne School, Uno Pre 666 Spadina. On the south side of College, you have Lillian Smith Library, COTHRA Mansions. It's a lot of great heritage. And some of it was listed outside. The College Street study is just the beginning. So 19191 comes as a challenge. How can we most efficiently mobilize to make sure the good that has happened with it can happen elsewhere? Understanding city heritage will soon open the door to public participation. Here's what we've done. Harvard Village has already formed tables of listings and individual files. Yesterday, before bud break, we photographed the north side of College and all 50 listed properties with 83 addresses in our catchment, using the information we could glean from the city's heritage property search site. We now need help on what exactly the city needs us to do to make complete applications for designation. The HVRA letter gives you a lengthy list of questions. Can we model on the recent designation materials presented as at council, such as that for 191 College? Could we steal the language from that? It's good. Background on College Street, it's sitting right there. Are there quick ways to get appropriate information? How much information is enough? Is there already information at City Hall we should know so we don't duplicate efforts and lose opportunities? If it would help, HVRA could be the site of a pilot to model a how-to. We might be able to identify pitfalls and shortcuts other residents might benefit from. Ways to efficiently and accurately design an implementation model to get the city the information it needs from communities that are eager to help. In a sense, this could be a renaissance of sorts for heritage conservation by enlisting the strengths and passion of our residents in working toward a common goal. Synergies abound. Baldwin and HVRA share College Street. The Annex and ourselves share UNOPRE architecture. The opportunities for combining forces are striking in their simplicity. But from today's hearing and understanding the ongoing pressures heritage preservation services are under, please consider whether this public initiative merits a separate pathway and as an assigned member of staff. The challenge is unprecedented and cannot be met within existing structures. Time to think outside the box. Think a joint task force whose sole objective is to save the maximum number of wood properties in our city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. Very, very much. Do we have any questions of our speaker? Seeing none, thank you for your time today, Sue.
Okay, no problem.
Do we have any questions of staff? Paul.
Please don't shoot. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Paul first, and then
Yep,
and then
of
we'll
course.
come to you, Adam.
My question is about the comment about the door openings, and I just want to be sure, is the intention that there will continue to be fairly small retail or commercial units on the ground floor, and each of those door openings will be a separate working door to a separate enterprise or space inside?
I'd prefer that the applicant actually address that issue. I think it's going to be a rather open space. However, as you can see with the row houses and the College Street frontage, there are interstitial recesses between each of the buildings. So it will help to provide kind of a perception of a smaller space within the overall larger space. I don't think it's been determined whether these will be smaller commercial spaces necessarily or a larger space within that extends across the frontages.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. But Adam and then Bob.
Okay, I have one comment and 4 questions. The 4 questions are generally yes, no, but it will help clarify the conditions. So the first comment is, I would like staff to seriously consider Sue Dexter's deposition, or deputation rather. As the chair of the Preservation Panel of Toronto East York, you've asked for help coordinating community research for 3,800 some odd properties. We do need direction ASAP with the clock ticking, so please seriously consider Sue's deputation. I'm going to jump into the questions about the College and Henry site now. The first is, has there been any assessment of the brick condition under the stucco? And on a related note, 76 Henry Street has severe deterioration of the exterior brickwork due to malfunctioning downspouts. If staff could look into that, it'd be hugely appreciated. I'm going to do the other questions very briefly as well. There is, I would like a bit more information on what's in the interpretation plan for this site, if that's been determined at this point. Number 3 is that there is an active application for naming the laneway running adjacent to this site with a historical name, St. Lager Lane. That's been in the works for 3 or 4 years now. We would appreciate an update if anyone from that division is here. And the 4th is, I strongly encourage city planning staff and heritage planning staff to please approach the Baldwin Village Community Association to have another meeting with them to bring them up to speed on this project and hear updated community concerns. Thank you.
Over to you, Dan.
Okay, I think I can address some of those questions. Firstly, in terms of the condition of the brick, that will be assessed more fulsomely before the conservation plan. Some of those buildings, as you can see, have stucco. on them, and so that stucco will be removed. And I think it's questionable what the condition of the brick will be underneath. However, it is proposed to repair the brickwork and masonry underneath the masonry, and repair the brickwork that is actually still present on the facades. So that will come forward at the conservation plan stage. Also, excuse me, sorry, the second item is something I cannot address. It's not really pertinent to this project, so that will have to be addressed by management with regard to Sue Dexter's comments. The third question, there was a question about the laneway. That's also
St. Leger Lane, named after the race course, which was there in the 1840s, that abutted the site. I know it's been sitting in the works for 3 or 4 years, and that may help the development application. That laneway actually has a name for directing resources, and it would be part of the history of the site as well.
Right. I don't think I can really comment on that item, that element. It's not something that I've considered within this the view of this application, but it certainly is a comment that can be taken forward and also provided to planning as well. The other item, the interpretation plan, that's also an element that we a report that we receive at a later date. So I'm not really sure what the content of that interpretation plan will be at this point.
Thank you, Dan. Anne, do you have further commentary or ability to answer Adam's questions?
So I was just going to jump in and say, yes, we will be taking Sue Dexter's points very seriously. We do have an ongoing project, as you know, Adam, and most of the members of the TPB. We have an ongoing project about how we're going to tackle with designations following the removal of properties from the Heritage Register at the end of the year. And we will be bringing forward a report to the TPB to consider this project. I think it's at the next TPB, but I'm not 100% of the next TPB or the TPB after that. We will be bringing a report forward to give you an update with respect to that. And the other point you made about the naming of laneways, heritage planning staff don't get involved with the naming of laneways. You'll have to speak to the appropriate city staff. There's probably somebody from transportation who deals with that.
I'll do that, and I'll make sure that Heritage Planning does have a copy of that lane naming application, because it's so intrinsically linked to the history of this site that borders the site on one side. If you're having the interpretation plan under development, it would be, I think, relevant for that interpretation plan. And just the other outstanding comment is there any possibility of planning staff, whether it's Heritage or City Planning or both, meeting with the Baldwin Village Community Association? They've approached our panel expressing questions and concerns. I feel it's more appropriate for city staff to address those, just with the updated state of this application and to hear their updated feedback.
Through you, Madam Chair, development applications are project managed through community planning. So if you wish for that, speak to the community planner on file who can address your concerns.
Okay, I'll direct you to that. Thank you.
Do we have other questions of staff? Bob?
I think I'm going to already know what the answer is, but let me try. The 7476 Henry is, I presume, part of the residential area and not part of the College Street frontage in terms of zoning, and that the purchase of that house and the restoration of that pair of houses is probably a tactic for forming a transition between the tower and Henry Street, which I don't know how many of you know, but is a delightful street, and it's within the last 15 years had redevelopment along it for the Ronald McDonald House, which is very sensitively integrated into the street. So my concern is the impact of this development on Henry Street. The planning issue, I guess, is do any angular planes relate to the height of this building with regard to the residential area to the south? College Street. I think the answer will be, oh, that's a planning matter. We can't deal with it in heritage. Okay.
And if I may,
you are correct that those are elements that planning does look at. I can only hypothesize why there is no building mass atop the properties at 74 to 76 Henry Street, likely to provide that transition that you speak about, and also to provide side step backs for the tower from the residential neighborhood. Although I have not been involved in various aspects of the review of this application until very recently. But suffice to say that 74, 76 will be preserved and conserved in total, and there will not be massing atop that property at all. So it will serve as a rather sensitive transition to the Henry Street frontages, the buildings that front on Henry Street.
Thank you. Bob?
Just a further comment. I mean, it is a comment, but it seems to me that heritage staff should be in a position to say whether whether the alteration is compatible in design with the heritage buildings. And what we've been shown so far, it seems to be that the scale of development, I'm not talking about height so much as scale. Architects should understand what scale means. The two buildings, that is the existing buildings and the new buildings, are so discordant in scale that it trivializes the heritage buildings. Does staff ever have the opportunity to discuss that kind of issue?
We can't disagree with you, but this is the planning framework that we have in Ontario. And along College Street, these heights are permissible for various reasons.
But as I said, I'm not talking about height, I'm talking about scale. The scale and height are quite different questions.
I see you, Adam.
I have a bit of info to add on to Robert's comments.
So hold on a second, please,
Yeah.
please. We're asking questions of staff. We're veering into discussion amongst ourselves.
It is
about
also
the
a
issue.
question
Can
of staff.
Then let's have a question of staff, because just
So-
trying to keep us in order,
Yep.
please.
There's also some overlap I do want to acknowledge. So the Baldwin Village Community Association about 4 years ago approached the preservation panel, and again quite recently inquiring about the feasibility of a cultural heritage resource evaluation or a heritage conservation district for Henry Street and the broader Baldwin Village neighborhood. What is the feasibility of that?
I think that's a question for management.
The city heritage planning. Sorry, my phone's going off in the background, so you'll have to ignore that. Heritage planning does have a study work program that it is currently working through, and if that is on the study work program, Tamara's not here today to answer that question whether it is on the study work program, but if it is on the study work program, then that is something that we're going to undertake as part of that program. We don't have a current timeline for when such a study would take place.
How do we get something on the study work program if it's not there already?
Contact us and we can. I
Okay.
can direct you to Tamara and we can talk about that.
Absolutely, we'll be in touch then. Thank you.
We have other questions of staff, and just my fellow board members, if you're here, if you don't mind keeping your cameras on, so that I can see you and make sure that I have, everybody present and accounted for. Much appreciated. Do we have other questions of staff? Seeing none, do we have any discussions about the recommendations before us in the matter at hand? All for once, I know that on our next meeting that we have discussion about the Heritage Register, and I think a lot of the discussion that we're hearing today and the concerns about from Ms. Dexter and that we're hearing on multiple properties, that would be a really good forum for us to have a discussion about different ways and strategies forward and how we might think about things. And I'm really looking forward to being able to have that. Other discussions about the item before us today? Seeing none, we have a staff report with recommendations. Does anybody care to move them? I do. All those in favor, please. Thank you. The motion carries. Moving on now to PB 15.7, 137 Roxborough Drive, alterations to a designated heritage property in the North Rosedale Heritage Conservation District, and this is a refusal. There are speakers on the items. We've also had a communication on this item asking for a deferral of it. Given certain parameters and in the schedule, it could be deferred till only the next meeting, the March 28th meeting. So I thought we should sort of gauge the appetite now before we proceed, because the speaker will have an opportunity, but only one opportunity to speak, either if we hear the matter today or if we hear the matter on the 28th. Just as a little motion, are my fellow members in favor of deferring this until the next meeting? Hands? Yes or no? Yes, okay. I think that, we have a motion from clerks that if Matthew, if you don't mind putting that up, and or correct me if I've got anything wrong.
No,
Please.
yeah, you're fine. Actually, I was just correcting myself. I had it as the May 28th meeting, but it's the March 28th meeting. So here's the motion. Madam Chair, you're moving this?
Yes, I'll move this. That consideration of the item be deferred until March 28th, 2024 meeting of the Toronto Preservation Board. Is there any discussion amongst ourselves? Seeing none, I have moved this. All those in favor, please. I need to see your hands. Thank you very much. That carries. We'll hear this meeting at the next meeting. Moving on now. And I think we can go back to Cawthron, but I think there'll be more discussion on that. So we're going to continue just to keep that on hold until towards the end. We're moving on now to 15.8. 38 Walmer Road, alterations to and demolition of heritage attributes and demolition of buildings on a designated property. This is a refusal. We have a staff report that we can hear. Do my fellow board members wish to hear the report? Yes, then please, Clint, take it away.
Sure. Good afternoon. Again, Clint Robertson with Heritage Planning. I'm presenting item PB 15.8 regarding 38 Walmer Road for alterations to and demolition of heritage attributes of a designated property and demolition of designated buildings. The property was individually designated under the Ontario Heritage Act in July 2023. This report recommends that the heritage permit application made December 13th, 2023 be refused, as it has not been demonstrated that the cultural heritage value and attributes of the heritage property will be conserved consistent with the heritage planning policy framework, or that the heritage impacts of the proposal would be appropriately mitigated. The heritage planning application is related to a concurrent planning application, which is currently under appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Following advice from the city solicitor, the applicant has submitted the related heritage permit applications at this time, and this allows for the consolidation of the OHA, Ontario Heritage Act, and Planning Act issues as part of the same appeal process. Slide 1, please. This location map shows the subject site of 38 Walmer Road, highlighted with the red arrow. It's at the corner of Walmer Road and Lowther Avenue in the Annex neighborhood. Next slide, please. This slide shows the property, which comprises an 1889 Queen Anne Revival style Sunday school building in pink, an 1892 sanctuary designed in the Romanesque style with Gothic style references in yellow, and the 1913 Memorial Building with Gothic Revival detail in orange. The application proposes to alter and demolish heritage attributes of the 1892 Sanctuary Building and to demolish the 1889 Sunday School Building and to demolish the 1913 Memorial Building. Next slide, please. This slide shows images of the property's west and south elevations, or sorry, of the sanctuary's west and south elevations. In addition to the demolition of the buildings previously mentioned, in brief, the application proposes retention of the sanctuary building's exterior walls and the roof with alterations to window and door openings, and including the lowering of some and the introduction of new openings. Next slide, please. In brief, the proposal for the sanctuary's interior also includes the demolition or alteration of many of the heritage attributes, including the configuration with raked floor and horseshoe-shaped gallery, iron columns, foyer walls, staircases, chancel, pipe organ features. The application proposes to insert a new floor plate within the sanctuary space to create an additional interior story. Shown are interiors of the sanctuary, which will see many of the heritage attributes shown being altered or demolished. Also shown is a portion of the Sunday school, the interior of which will be demolished as part of the building, and the auditorium and its finishes in the memorial building, which would be demolished as part of the building. Next slide, please. The permit application reflects the proposal in the related official plan, zoning bylaw amendment, and site plan applications, which are currently under appeal. This slide shows a conceptual rendering of the proposal, which shows retention of the sanctuary building, but demolition of the memorial and Sunday school buildings further to the west. Next slide. This slide shows the proposed site plan and configuration of the proposed development with the new tower west of the sanctuary's west wall. Next slide. And finally, this slide shows the proposed south and east elevations. This is my final slide. At this time, staff is recommending refusal of the heritage permit applications for the reasons detailed in the report, as they fail to demonstrate that the proposal will conserve the cultural heritage values and attributes defined in the property statement of significance and how. Staff will continue to work in partnership with our internal divisions and the applicant through the appeal process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clint. Do we have any questions of staff? Adam?
So just to clarify, there are interior designated elements at this site?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It's egregious that they are trying to demolish those.
Any other questions of staff? Bob?
Will there continue to be any religious use of this building, or is it entirely a conversion to residential?
Through the chair, the current proposal is to see the congregation move back into the church, albeit in a completely reconfigured space. It would be a flexible space, but the congregation would be in charge of helping to design that space. And yes, the congregation plans to move back into the space.
But the building sanctuary that we see now is not going to be the sanctuary in the future, according to this proposal. Is that correct?
Well, the congregation would move back into the sanctuary space, but the sanctuary space would be entirely reconfigured with the current floor plate removed and a new floor plate, actually 2 new floor plates inserted.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions of staff? Seeing none?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Is there more information available on what the configuration of the sanctuary will actually look like? Like, has any imagery been produced of that yet?
The Heritage Impact Assessment, which is publicly available, shows what was proposed to us, and which is what we're basing this refusal off of. The application basically referred back to the original heritage impact assessment. And so, yes, there was a proposal for how everything would be configured, but I mean, quite frankly, the applicant is continuing to work through the proposal. So it's, and that's partly why we're refusing this, because certain things are not entirely clear to us as to how elements of the interior would actually be dealt with. So it's still a little bit oblique as to what the final plan would be. Again, the proposal is changing and there's not enough detail in our minds, even with the current proposal.
Jeff.
It appeared to me that the Sunday school building and the memorial hall, if that's the correct term, were completely demolished, would be completely demolished. Is that correct?
That is the current proposal, yes.
Other questions of staff? Seeing none, thank you very much, Clint. Is there any discussion amongst ourselves? Yes, Bob.
Well, just a comment that this seems to be an ideal opportunity to think about converting existing buildings rather than pulling them down and starting again. So I think that's what we should be promoting rather than demolition of buildings and building towers in perfectly good neighborhoods.
Absolutely. Any other discussion? Seeing none, we have a staff report with recommendations before us. Would anybody care to move that report? Paul, thank you. All those in favor? Perfect. Motion carries. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to move on to the next item, and then I will, we're going to figure things out because we're going to have to take a break today in the agenda. We still have lots left, and I want to make sure that there's brain cells for all of us. We all remain hydrated, and that we can consider the items at hand. So we'll move on to, we'll do one more item, and then what we'll do is we'll have a motion before us about how we'll handle that break, just to give everybody a heads up. So we're moving on now to EB 15.9, 374, 376, and 378 Yonge Street, the refusal of application for alterations to designated heritage properties under Part 4, Section 33 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We have a staff report before us. My fellow members, I assume we'd like to hear the report. Yes, please. I think that's over to you, Dan.
Okay, we've graduated to afternoon, so good afternoon, members of the board. Dan DeBartolo once again of Heritage Planning staff. The item before you is a proposal to alter the heritage properties and is in connection with an appeal to the Ontario Lands Tribunal regarding submitted official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications. Next slide, please. Here we see the site at the southwest corner of Yonge Street and Gerrard Street West. Next slide, please. Here we see the site consisting of 3 designated heritage properties. From left to right, we have 374 Yonge Street, a 2.5-story second empire style commercial and residential mixed use building constructed in 1872. Next, we have 376 Yonge Street, a 2.5-story Georgian style commercial and residential mixed use building constructed in 1865. Lastly, at the corner, 378 Yonge Street, the Dominion Bank building was constructed in 1930 from the modern classical design of John Lyle. Interestingly, This property was included on the first Toronto City Council inventory of heritage properties in June of 1973. Also, the policies contained within site and area specific policy 174, Yonge Street between Queen Street and north of Gerrard Street, known as SAST 174, also apply at this site. These policies provide direction for the enhancement and conservation of the contextual value at the subject site. Specific policies expanded within your report provide guidance in order to maintain the low scale of new buildings and pedestrian character of this portion of Yonge Street. Next slide. At the subject site, a 74-story mixed-use tower is proposed. The tower rises from behind the street wall established by the heritage podium. Above the heritage property, the tower is set back 1 to 1.5 meters behind the ridge of the existing roof ridges of 374 and 376 Yonge Street, which in turn are approximately 7.5 meters from Yonge Street. The 7.5 meter step back is then reduced irregularly to 2 meters for the rest of the tower height from Yonge Street. Thus, the resultant reveal above the heritage properties is 7.5 meters directly at the heritage roofs, but decreases to a 2 meter step back from the 7th to the 9th floor and above. Next slide, please. A slightly larger reveal is included above the former Dominion Bank building at 378 Yonge Street at the Yonge Street frontage. Note that there will be no excavation below the Dominion Street building, and the building will be retained in full, exterior and interior. The impact of the project with regards to the fundamental heritage attributes of scale, form, and massing of the heritage buildings on the subject property, specifically at 374 and 376 Yonge Street, is substantial. The proposed tower placed atop the heritage building with minimal step back from Yonge Street, in combination with the inadequate reveal directly above the heritage properties as proposed, would interfere with the perception of the low-rise form of the heritage buildings as perceived from the public realm at the Yonge Street frontage. Also, with the proposed loss of the building's scale, form, and massing, the property would no longer contribute in any meaningful way to the established heritage character and context of Yonge Street. The proposed tall tower, mostly built out to the front property line facing Yonge Street with its 2 meter step back, would interrupt the established historic low-scale street wall that helps to design the historic sense of place along Yonge Street. Based upon impact to the heritage properties and to the perception of built form and scale along the Yonge Street frontage, staff recommends refusal of this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. We have 2 speakers on this item. Philip Goldsmith is here. Do you have a presentation or?
Yes, there's a presentation that somebody could put up.
And just like all of the other, you'll have 5 minutes and I will wave and cavort when you're getting close to the end of your time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I must say I will need the full 5 minutes. I'll also say I'm joined by Eileen Costello, who isn't on my screen, but is also here to answer questions. She's the lawyer for the project.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Matthew, if we've got a presentation, do we need to give Mr. Goldsmith sharing rights, or is somebody sharing?
Mr. Goldsmith has the ability to share the presentation from his screen there.
Perfect.
I'm sorry, do I share it from my screen or does it get?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, you'd need to share it from your screen.
Okay, I was unaware of that. Let me see. Okay. Screen share. Okay, I apologize. All right, so. All right, thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the board. I don't propose to go through the background of the project. You've had the staff report, so you know where the project is and what it includes. I do propose to address some of the comments in the staff report that have led to the conclusion that this should be refused. and ask that the board reconsider and approve this project once you've heard our comments. This is a rendering of the project from the corner of Yonge and Gerrard. As you can see in the foreground is the John Lyall building for the Dominion Bank, and the two heritage buildings, 374 and 376 beyond. I will also add, when you're looking at this slide, in fairness to Dan DiBartolo, that this shows some alteration to the design that is a result of the fact that we are at the OLT that have been recently proposed and not yet part of an amended HIA. Here you can see the project in context. I think it's fair to say that the nature of Yonge and Gerrard has changed dramatically over the years. This illustration shows not only our project, but other projects that are either existing, proposed and approved, or under construction. So when you see it in the context of what is emerging here, this is definitely a tall building area. The historic bank at the base of Yonge Street, as you can see on the left and in the blow up in the middle, will continue to be seen at the base of Yonge Street, where it narrows at Gerrard, forming a terminus to that view. And we have taken that into account in the design of the tower with its pilasters that draw inspiration from the 1930s building. These are the buildings on site. 372 is a listed building, but you can see it has lost all integrity and is barely recognizable as a heritage building. 374 and 374A is a modest mid-block building, as is 376. You can see in this image that 376, the form of the building is not visible from the street, as it's between the higher form of 374 and 378. 378 is proposed to be retained in its entirety as a whole building, interior and exterior, and I'll come back to that in a minute. In fact, I'll come back to it right now. 378, as you can see, is an important Art Deco building. It was designed by John Lyall, and it was designed in response to Eaton's College Street. Eaton's College Street inspired a Woolworths building on the north side of Gerrard, this building, and the building that you just see a glimpse of, which is the former Basil's restaurant, forming an important Art Deco nexus in the city. We're proposing to save this building in its entirety, exterior and interior, and although it's in really good condition with all of its exterior heritage attributes in place, or almost all of them, we have an image of the front doors that are missing over the years, and we will replicate those, as well as preserving what's on site. There has been a discussion in the staff report about the loss of form and massing. I disagree with that assessment of the site. Here we see the images of 374 and 376, and on the right, an image of what we're proposing. As you can see, the new building that replaces 372 has been held at 2 stories for some distance from Yonge Street before rising to 3 stories, thus exposing, as it is now, the south elevation of 374. From the street, you cannot see beyond the ridge of the building, and all of the heritage attributes are on the street frontage. 376 is going to be retained in its entirety back to the ridge. I will add that the roofs of these buildings will have to be removed for construction of the tower. They will be returned, including their dormers, to restore the building to what you see now.
You have 30 seconds.
Oh dear, 5 minutes goes fast. So this just reinforces the fact that you'll see the form, an existing and proposed elevation. I was going to discuss the step backs, which you have heard from Dan. The increase in the reveal that you see in this image on the right is proposed on the right. On the right is proposed now. On the left is from the HIA. You can see there's a significant difference by increasing the stepped back reveal by an extra floor. And here are the renderings from the corner. Sorry, I have to go so fast. Here is imaging context so that you can see that the contribution of the heritage buildings in this high-rise district are roughly the same as now. And finally, I just wanted to talk about a comment about one single retail space. We have preserved the 3 storefronts. We have return walls that allow the storefronts to be fully expressed. We have a part second floor so that they don't appear out of scale. On the interior, the demising has not yet been determined, but in order to have viable demising, we need to be flexible so that it can be 1, 2, or all 3 units. It's important, not only to us, but the city, that you have viable commercial space. And this was going to comment on how this project is not that viable.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll have questions and we can sort of seek some of the clarifications, what you had to rush through.
Yes.
I'm going to take a very quick pause because we need to do our motion in terms of the break, just because of sort of, Matthew, do you mind putting that up for us, please? So I will move right now that the Preservation Board extend its meeting past the scheduled 12:30 p.m. lunch recess until 1 p.m. and then resume at 2 p.m. after the lunch recess. Is there any discussion about this? Seeing none. Oh, yes, Bob. You're muted, Bob.
Still muted.
You're still muted, Bob. Unfortunately, Bob, you're still muted.
Sorry. I have a 2:30 appointment that I can't avoid.
Okay, we will still have quorum after that, but I think for the sake of staff and the complications, like we've got heady issues today, I'd still like to keep the motion as is. But thank you very much for letting us know. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries with a minute to spare for 12:30. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience. Do we have any questions of either Mr. Goldsmith or Ms. Costello, who is here to answer questions of us? Adam.
Unmute.
Adam is on mute.
Sorry, my apologies. Please bear with me. I do have 3 questions. Some of them intersect the applicant, some intersect staff, and some a combination thereof. I'm going to start with from the south of the site on the Walton Street side, moving north with my questions. The first is I disagree with Philip's comments around 372, and I know that's not part of this application, but I would like there to be a motion to reconsider the heritage value of that building. That's an 1864 building, pre-Confederation, with a connection to the Wanless family. They're a very prominent family in the merchant history of Yonge Street. The fenestration pattern is intact on the second floor and the massing of that building. The storefront has been modernized, and the only section truly lost is the half-story attic addition and the cornice. All of that could be reconstructed. It's like a missing tooth on that block that's otherwise intact. And that's also the only remaining historical building on Walton Street, which is a very important historical street in the center of downtown Toronto that was lost during the slum clearing initiatives in the mid-20th century. It was also an early site of Chinatown. So I would like there to be a motion perhaps to reconsider 372 Yonge Street and the possibility for conservation and restoration as part of this project. Moving to the next building, 374, 376, that building has massive structural and settlement cracks in the facade. I have been flagging this to staff for at least 4 years. The cracks are deteriorating. I have severe concerns over the future of that building. It is deteriorating rapidly. I would like there to be a motion for heritage planning staff to work with the applicant and other city divisions to stabilize that building. If this is rejected, it's going to go back to the drawing board. I don't think that building has more than a few years left unless it's stabilized. The cracks are massive.
Those first 2 questions were, I think, very clearly staff related.
Okay.
So can we pause those?
Okay, my apology. The third question is definitely applicant. Is that a billboard on top of the Lyle building post restoration? If so, why is there a billboard up there? It just seems to be very much detracting from that heritage building.
That billboard exists at present. It has been permitted for some years now, and the owner does not want to give up his current permit to have that billboard.
Goodness. And is that billboard a heritage attribute?
No, it is not a heritage attribute.
Do we have
If
other?
it assists, Madam Chair, it's Ms. Costello. If it assists through you, just to provide Mr. Wynn through you, Madam Chair, with a response, that was a signed permit which was issued by the City of Toronto, and it was done, of course, after the Lyle building had been designated and was done in consultation with heritage preservation staff. And it's also a billboard for which a portion of the billboard time is dedicated to not-for-profit and community events, as well as those by the City of Toronto. So that's the full answer to the history of the
Thank you
billboard.
for that clarification. We were all sitting down at City Hall last week in the preservation panel meeting, trying to figure out what that was in the rendering.
It's an existing billboard. If you had walked by the site, you would have seen it.
We had looked
Thank
at
you
the, and
very
that
much,
was our
Madam Chair.
that was our assumption based on the current site conditions. It was the billboard being retained. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions of either Mr. Goldsmith or Ms. Costello? Yes, Wendy.
Okay, it just follow up questions about the step backs, if this can be more explanations. And again, is that here is 2 meters, if I'm not getting wrong. So is that the max that can have the pushback? And also about the final design of the look, the features of the building, and is it any considerations of how that's going to match and to go with the neighborhood buildings, and to consider the overall look of the streetscapes? And I understand that's been like mentioned about that strip of downtown core, and would that be like, adding into, well, in my opinion, that part is really losing the characteristic of that sessions. And so I just like to questions about the design of the look of the building and how that work with complementing the overall in a better way, rather than contribute to more glass wall exterior. Thank you.
Is this a question for staff or the
I'm not sure how to respond. May I put the screen back up? I had to rush through that.
Of
part
course.
very, very much. So, I don't know. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, that didn't work. Oh, there we go. Okay. There. Now you can see my screen?
Yes.
So I'd like to come back to this discussion because it is an important one. I'll start here. And I didn't get to explain very much that in light of the OLT in recent weeks, we have decided to increase the reveal behind the building by a full story. So as you see on the left, the current proposal raises the step outs of the building by a full floor, putting a simple blank wall behind the buildings in order to reinforce their presence in the streetscape. The stepping is a fairly complex response to opening up the corner well above the John Lyle building. In fact, the final floor plate only happens at the 10th floor above this building. The stepping is to prevent what has happened in many approved projects in the city, where you get this inverted wedding cake kind of effect with large soffits above the heritage buildings. By breaking it up, by creating a pattern and light under the soffits, we're avoiding the dark shadow effect that often happens in that situation. And we've seen projects today already that have that big flat stepping out over the heritage buildings. The 2-meter step back is in response to the site, but is not inconsistent with other projects that have been approved nearby. To the north, a project with 0 step backs, and your next item is for a project south on Yonge Street with 0 step backs above the heritage buildings, which one approved historically, one is up for approval now. I think a great deal of care has been taken to allow these heritage buildings to dominate the pedestrian experience on the street. And so I would debate the staff conclusion here. But again, in fairness to staff, we did raise the reveal by a full floor, which has really helped. So if I come back to Well, I have to find it here. If I come back to an explanation of the step backs, there's a 9-meter step back from the north entirely above the John Lyle building, and a 7.5-meter step back from Yonge, which, as was noted, is 1 to 1.5 meters behind the ridges of the heritage buildings. These are dimensions with which the board must be familiar because there are several projects in town, including some of my own, that have this kind of approach that was approved in the past. As we step up, that the building steps out, but it is complex to understand. So, you know, this is the 5th floor before you get the stepping out beginning, and it steps out in small 2-meter increments and until you get to the 10th floor. At that height, and from anything but a distance, it's hard to judge whether it's 2 meters or some greater number. And the breaking up and stepping of the step back helps with that. Again, pushing the heritage buildings as the dominant feature of the streetscape. When you look at the context of here, this is an illustration that helps to show that. But when you look at the context of this project, the rendering on the right illustrates projects that are built, approved for construction, or under construction. This is the actual context of Yonge and Gerrard into which this tower will be inserted. It is a tall building neighborhood. Even if we didn't build this building, it is a tall building neighborhood. And as you can see, looking up the street in the rendering versus the photograph, it's very similar. It really is very similar. So as for the design of the tower, as I said, it is largely a glass tower broken by pilasters. The pilasters draw inspiration from the pilasters of the heritage building, but the intention is to keep it both an interesting composition broken into parts. I'll go back here to the overall rendering. Broken into parts to help reduce the scale of the project, with amenity floors, and it's meant to keep it as light as possible and in the context similar to other buildings that are being built in this area. So I hope that answers the question in more detail.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do we have other questions of our speakers? Seeing none, do we have questions of staff? Yes, Mr. Wynn, you can.
So we're returning to my previous questions. I'm going to share the screen for one moment, just to show a comparison of the before and after this building to help with that motion.
Please, no. Thank you very much. This is the time for questions.
So for starts, can we get a motion to have 372 evaluated for designation, please, as part of the same development parcel? It's part of this intact block. I dispute this beyond recognition. It's very much still recognizable in its placement, in its fenestration, in its massing. There's been some minor alterations to the exterior that are all completely reversible. And the second question is regarding the stabilization and the current condition of the other designated building on this site, where we've been flagging it for 4 years and there's been no action on site to stabilize this building.
So in respect of the first one,
yeah,
you need to put something to heritage planning through the email, and motion will have to work that out going forward.
The clerks are currently working on it.
There we have it. And then I will send it over to staff for point number 2.
Madam Chair, it's Ms. Costello speaking, and I wondered if I, again, could just assist.
Yeah.
All of these properties were considered for designation as part of the development application process. And a staff report came forward designating 374 and 376, and city staff considered the designation merits of 372 as part of that staff report, which came forward just last year, and recommended, and this board agreed, as did city council, that 372 was not worthy of designation. So I'm simply putting that forward because I would not want there to be, with the passage of time, a confusion as to when or how city staff considered the merits of the designation of that property.
No, I appreciate that context. I think perhaps Dan or perhaps Anne, if you could sort of speak to Mr. Wynn's points and then within this context.
This is Dan Barlow. I was not involved in the initial review of this project. However, I do have the understanding that 372 Yonge Street was evaluated by Heritage Planning staff and was not considered to have requisite heritage value. And Fisher might contribute more comment.
Actually, through you, Madam Chair, I don't have anything further to add to what Dan has said. Heritage Planning did review this and did not recommend designation of this property.
So at this point, Adam, we can hold on to this for discussion amongst us because we have an answer from staff at this point. We've also got the precedent that we've set as a board in a previous motion. So we need to be very careful about how we consider this. But so let's have this as part of our discussion. For right now, though, we are in questions of staff. Does anybody else have a question of staff?
Madam Chair, may I address the second question about the condition of 374?
Yes, please and thank you. If you're able to speak to that, that'd be lovely.
Thank you. Yes, we were contacted by Toronto Buildings about the condition of 374, and we are currently monitoring any movement. There has been subsidence of the central wall between the two halves of 374, which has allowed those diagonal cracks. We believe they are dramatic for sure, but stable. And so we are monitoring them for now to make sure there is no further deterioration. Later during construction, clearly we will have to address the stability of that facade. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there further questions of staff at this point? Seeing none, we're now into discussion amongst ourselves. Does anybody care to raise a point?
I'm going to raise a point again about 372. I'm just baffled by that staff decision, quite frankly. The building's been clad with stuck-on tiles that could be removed. The storefront's been modernized. That's completely reversible. We see that all the time with heritage buildings. And the cornice and top roof section was altered. Again, that's completely reversible. The fenestration, the massing, everything else is intact in that building, and it's really anchoring that whole site. You have a whole intact block of largely pre-Confederation buildings on Yonge Street with one corner building of the Art Deco style. That is really quite remarkable. And to lose that corner building because it's been overclad and had minor alterations is just phenomenal. That's now selling the death toll for one of these heritage buildings. I sent photos to the board, by the way. You can look at them in your email before and after the alterations around 2009, 2010.
Jeff, you have a point?
Well, I hear Adam his point, but I have a concern that since this item has already come forward, it's already been reviewed by Heritage and did not meet the value of the heritage value sufficiently, that I don't think it's appropriate procedurally to have it send it back again. I have a concern about that. It was different than our earlier issue with Cawthra Square.
I think that's a fair point to make. I have similar concerns because it opens a very awkward door as a precedent in terms of sending things back, especially ones that we have considered before. I think we have to tread very carefully here. Bob.
I presume the issue before us in this document is whether the setbacks are satisfactory or not. And staff has concluded they are not satisfactory. And we've heard from Phil Goldsmith why he thinks they're satisfactory. I do agree with Phil on this question of having one big setback, that we do see those very blank and ugly soffits of the setback, which probably are more destructive with regard to how one sees the illusion, I would say, of heritage buildings, So I'm inclined to not accept the staff's view of this, and given the context within which we're seeing this, I must say, and this is a planning issue again, so I guess Heritage can't deal with it. But the whole idea of podiums was to deal with some of the wind issues of wind coming down onto the street. The setback of the tower was to reduce the setback on the podium of the tower was to reduce the wind load on the building, on the street. That's all gone by the board now as we get so excited about the heritage buildings and their impact on them. That whole issue has been lost. And so the environmental quality of the street is deteriorated. So we're not playing that game anymore. I mean, it's ridiculous that we've lost that whole idea. So I'm inclined to go along with the persuasion that this is no worse than many others, and therefore would not accept the staff's report.
Paul?
I'd just add one more comment to that. I felt the same when I looked at it, especially seeing the latest revisions to the setback, that it did not look to me, to my inexpert eye, as an offense to the street as it is becoming. I would draw attention to that illuminated sign. I certainly understand why a property owner would retain it, but I have to say, I think its position probably doesn't do justice to the good in this design. It makes the corner look rather ugly, and if that sign weren't there, the rest of the design might look a lot more appealing. Just a comment, but I agree. I don't think this one's an offensive design.
I think we've got two different. We were presented today a revision to what we had in the staff report, so we're dealing with sort of a different issue. And I think I know, Wendy, I saw your hand. Is that maybe I've got a question for Anne. Is that if we move the recommendations of this report, does that preclude like a further iteration of the process going forward, or the continued refinement in this way? I'm just looking to see how that works.
Yep. And
hold on, Adam, please. Can we have Anne answer my one question, and then we
Yep.
can get Wendy and then to you?
yeah.
So through you, Madam Chair, the application before you is for the scheme that is outlined in the Heritage Impact Assessment. So the revision that Phil Goldsmith mentioned, that may be considered as part of an overall settlement in the future of the outstanding appeal. But today, the application you're looking at is the application that was submitted, that is being discussed in the report.
Thank you. I think that's important clarification, that what exactly, what slice of the puzzle are we actually making a decision upon today? Wendy, you had a comment?
Well, yes, I just like to echo with the comments of to the member, and so I'm concerned. Yeah, if that is going to, if my understanding, the agreement is to have enter into the heritage easement, so to keep that too. But I really trouble with like that corner, and I don't know what will be the plan for the Chelsea Hotel. That I think this is a huge like site there. I don't remember whether they're going to demolish their existing building, and in that that strip, I'm not sure how that will on top of these few number 72, 76 Harry Street and the College Street 191. So I'm just very hesitant about the two heritage building. That's, if that is after restore, yeah, of course that is like what's about the stability. That's very, safety is very important. But at the same time, if that is after safety, preserve it and build on top of these two buildings, this corner, how they're going to impact further with already overcrowded population in the downtown core strip over there, and plus about the cityscape, like the streetscape there. So this comments, not really a questions. Thank you.
Adam, do you have comments?
I'm just curious about if the revised application shown to us, is that currently under review at City? Has that been submitted?
I think
Where is
that's
that sitting?
from my understanding is it's part of that ongoing process. So what we have
Okay.
before us
Yep.
are recommendations based upon that HIA, that it's going to continue to be an iterative process as it continues through sort of settlement. So it might end up being what this is going to be, but what we have before us is the recommendations based upon what has been submitted currently. So we might have seen something else, but we have to go with what has been recorded. Does that make sense?
Madam Chair, it's Ms. Costello again, and I know this is in
Ms.
committee,
Costello,
and
I apologize, but we're in the midst of our board.
I appreciate you're in committee. I was going to try and provide just some clarification, but I appreciate you're in committee, so I'll mute myself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Do we have any other discussion amongst ourselves? Adam, are you intending to proceed as you wanted to do, or
It puts me into a very difficult situation, so not at the current time. But I do encourage the applicant to consider it. But no, I will drop the motion.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Just so that we can make sure that we know exactly all that we're dealing with here. Is there any other discussion? Yes, Alex.
Yes, am I correct in assuming that if we do vote to reject, we can assume, as in the past, there will be discussions continuing? Could we add that as a sort of a recommendation that staff continue to pursue setback discussions with the applicant? Or maybe that's unnecessary. I assume that's what will happen in any case.
That would be my assumption. We can pose that. We can ask Anne to speak to that.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not 100% sure whether this is we are mediating this one, or it's at the board in any case. So whether this is something that's going to be mediated to reach a settlement, or whether this is going to a hearing, I'm not sure that has been resolved at this point in time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments? Yes, Jeff.
I'll be happy to make a motion to approve the staff recommendations.
Perfect. So we have our motion with staff recommendations. Jeff has moved that motion. All those in favor, please. Are there any opposed on this one? Seeing none, the motion carries. Thank you very much. We have 5 minutes before our break. I'm not sure that that's a substantive amount of time. Matthew, do I need to do anything to sort of say, let's start the break and we'll give an extra 5 minutes?
Yes. You can recess and we'll return at 2 o'clock.
I will see everybody at 2 o'clock. Thank you so much for all of your time so far today. So I think we've got quorum. So I think at any point I can resume.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you're all set to go. We are streaming. It is live, and you have 8 members right now.
Fantastic. Welcome back, everybody, and to members of the public who are watching. Thank you for bearing with us. You know, we know it's a long meeting, and we appreciate your patience and your forbearance as we go through this all together. So resuming where we left off, we are on PB 15.10, 49 and 51 Yonge Street, alterations to heritage properties, demolition of heritage attributes, and authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement. We have some speakers on this item, and we have a staff report. Do my fellow members wish to hear the staff report? Yes, please. So I will let them get all set up.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Georgia Cush. I'm a senior heritage planner, and this report recommends approval of the proposal to alter the designated properties and to demolish attributes at 49 and 51 Yonge Street and to obtain authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement. Next slide, please. The subject properties are located on the northeast corner of Yonge and Wellington Streets. Next. 49 Yonge Street is at Wellington. It's the corner building constructed for the Bank of British North America in the Second Empire style and designed by Henry Langley. The designation bylaw from 1980 also identifies interior attributes of marble detailing, central columns, and the high vaulted ceiling in the banking hall. But unfortunately, extensive interior alterations have taken place since its designation, and while some of the interior elements remain, there's little to no original fabric. Next slide, please. 51 Yonge Street, which is on the left of this image, contains a 4-story commercial building faced in limestone with a mansard roof and a cast iron storefront. And this building is also a fine representative example of a Second Empire style commercial building with a high degree of integrity. Next, please. An application was submitted in November 2021 to amend the zoning bylaw to permit a 60-story mixed-use building on the site, which included, at the time, the demolition of the easternmost bay of the south wall of 49 Yonge Street facing Wellington Street. The application was appealed to the OLT, and the resulting proposed settlement is represented in this heritage application. And these are the renderings of the current proposal. Through the review process, staff were able to achieve the full retention in situ of the street-facing elevations of the buildings, particularly along Wellington Street, as parts of it were proposed to be demolished, as well as obtaining a greater step back from Yonge Street with a softer transition to the portion of the tower above 49 Yonge. This is where there was originally a cantilever. Next slide, please. You can see that the portion of the tower above 51 Yonge Street rises to 20 stories and maintains a 4-meter step back. The application proposes to fully document and dismantle the interior banking hall of 49 Yonge and its features, and to recreate the hall by maintaining its spatial configuration, new internal columns, and vaulted ribbed ceiling, all in a contemporary design. There are no major additional interventions proposed for the exterior other than new windows and barrier-free accessibility, and these will be addressed in the conservation plan. Now, typically, staff would seek greater step backs above heritage buildings, but in this case, given the site's location in a highly intensified area with a large number of high-rise towers and the retention and conservation efforts that are proposed for the visible exterior elevations, staff find that the impacts of the new development are sufficiently mitigated. And in addition, staff are seeking a heritage easement agreement for the properties to ensure their long-term conservation. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgia. We have speakers registered on this item. It's my understanding that they're here to answer some questions. If I'm incorrect, if the speakers could let me know if they have a brief presentation. We have...
Hi, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes, my name is Imad Gattas. I'm with GBC Architects. We're the heritage consultants on that file. We don't have a presentation right now. We're here and available to answer any questions the board may have. And also the applicant team is there as well if there's any questions to the applicant team as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was my understanding. So we also have Victoria McCrum and Tomas, and I apologize, I'm not going to pronounce your last name for fear of, I don't want to get it wrong. So do we have any questions of our speakers? Seeing, yes, Alex.
Yes, I'm just curious, what is meant by the contemporary style for the vaulted ceiling in the banking hall?
So I can answer to this. Thank you for the question. So because we cannot physically conserve the interiors because of the requirement to put new columns and new structure, and because of the size of the new structure that is coming in, we looked at trying to bring back as much of the existing extent original features inside. But because of the proportions that are going to be created on the interior, the intent was to retain the spatial configurations with new structure at the exact locations of where they used to be. But because of the fact that we cannot bring back the physical extent attributes, we're going to bring them back in a contemporary flavor. So we're still going to debate that in the conservation plan as to how we're going to detail that. But what we are anticipating to do is to bring back the central columns. We're going to bring back the vaulted ceilings. We're going to bring back the ribbed vaults. And when we say contemporary is, for instance, instead of bringing back the egg and dart features along the rib vaults, we're probably going to do something a bit more simpler than that. So that's an example of the contemporary feature. The floor pattern, for instance, we do have archival photographs from 1904 that showed a pattern of what looked to me like mosaics. We're not restoring the mosaic flooring because it's no longer a banking hall. So we're going to do that in a contemporary design, but we're still going to be compatible with the historic appearance. So this is still something to be detailed in a conservation plan, but that's what we meant by contemporary features.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions of our speaker? Wendy.
I'm sorry, can you explain how the design for the, those built on top of the building and how that's echo with the with the building in terms of the style? Because I'm seeing the rendering is all glass, and then there's no, to my understanding, and so how that, like in terms of the echoed with the current design of the exterior, is it a pity that the interior already gone? So is it without a trace for the interior of the banking hall? So that's two questions. Thank you.
Okay, so the first question is about the I suppose how does the new building respond to the base building? So
yes.
This is a new design, so I was hoping the architect could be there, but I can bring to that. So the intent when you do new development or new construction, in this case above a heritage building, we look as much as possible to provide as much of a reveal or as much of a step back so that we can express more of the roof line. So this is the first item, and in terms of the height of that reveal, we looked at, in consultation with city staff during the OLT proceedings, we looked at increasing the setback on the upper floor so that the height of that reveal can more or less mimic the height of the building. So if you look at the height of the building and the height of where the soffit is located, which is kind of the last step back before the tower starts, they're more or less of the same height. So proportionally, it fits in this way. So that's how it was achieved. And I'm not sure about the second question, if you could repeat that, if it's possible.
Okay, so that is to do with from the staff report on page 2 on the the existing the interior banking hall. I believe that already gone. And so I just wonder, what's the condition? Is it like beyond restoration?
So, so the condition is not beyond restoration, but given the application to intensify the site, it's in an area that has a lot of office space, a lot of new residential space. It's very close to Union Station, so it's a desirable place to intensify. We looked at balancing conserving the building as much as we can while adding a new building on top. So we initially tried to look to see if it was possible to keep the interiors in situ without disturbance. Of course, this is not possible. And we then looked to see if there was an element to reuse the existing columns while adding new structure above. Obviously, that was not possible. We also tried to see if it was possible to recreate the structure in the same proportions to maintain again all of these dimensions, given the height of the tower that's proposed and I suppose the planning potential that's on the site. There was a requirement to increase the diameter of those columns. So so it is not it is restorable, but it was not the conservation strategy that was proposed here in light of the requirements to intensify as well. We did look again at bringing back, for example, the vaulted ceilings because they are restorable, but it's also important to know that half of the building on the interiors were renovated in the 1970s. So half of the interiors, even though they look historic, they're actually new materials. And all of the colors on the interiors is new paint. We did an exploratory opening on one of the columns, and we did find some traces of what looked like a historic finish. So this is something we would like to utilize as an interpretation as we design the new interiors to inform on some of those historic treatments that were employed in the inside of the building. So I'm not sure if I answered your question. But
yes, thank you very much for the information. I don't have the historical knowledge about the interior changes, and so just very quickly back to the exterior of the newly added portions, and somehow, well, thank you for your answer, and somehow I just feel like these two parts, the old and the preserved part exterior and the new add part, it's just like having something just interject or just puts it on top is not really speaking about the harmony for the whole building as a whole. Just my personal opinion. Okay, yeah, I don't know whether that is, yeah, thank you. Yeah,
I was gonna say, Wendy, we can talk about that when we talk as a board together, because that's all valid part of our discussion. Adam, you have a question for
Yes. Kind of two hand-in-hand questions. Are there interior photos that the board could be shown? You're asking us to vote on interior alterations, and my apologies if I missed these when I was coming up the stairs, but I've not seen any interior photos, and yet you're asking for us to vote on matters pertaining to interior alterations, and it's incredibly rare for there to be designated interior features. This is an extremely prominent building. I also wonder about 51. So much of the focus in this discussion so far has been on the 49, the Bank of British North America. But the building that's also part of this site, the earlier building with a connection to John Howard, is an extremely rare work by John Howard, and I've heard nothing about the interior condition of that one.
So I can speak to that a little bit. 51 Yonge Street is not, the interiors are not identified in the designation bylaw. And as for the interiors of 49, there are photographs in the Heritage Impact Assessment of historic photos and current photos as well.
Is there a reason, and my apologies, Madam Chair, for digressing off topics or questions for the applicant, but
hold on, can we table this?
okay,
Because
yep.
if we're going to move into question of staff, then it keeps things bundled. Do we have other questions for our speaker? Seeing none, he's now off the hot seat, and Adam, you can ask questions of staff.
I'm a bit baffled about why the interior photos were not transferred over to this report if we're being asked to consider the interior features as part of this decision. And I'm also curious if staff at any point have seen the interior of 51 and if there's any dialogue whatsoever, even if it's not within the designation bylaw. Just given the significance of that building, the architect, where it is in the city, the age of it, there may be interior features that weren't captured in the bylaw that would certainly warrant staff investigation.
Madam Chair, through you, we can't include every photograph or in the report, but we do reference the Heritage Impact Assessment, and there is quite a lot of information in there. I believe I did include a current image of the interior banking hall in the report.
My apologies. I'll double check that right now. I was scrolling through it as people were speaking. I was not seeing any interior photos. I see a lot of exterior renderings.
Yeah, you can certainly find them in the Heritage Impact Assessment. And what was your second question?
If staff at any point have seen the interior of 51.
So I would have to refer that to our policy and research staff because I wasn't involved in the designation. And yeah, I don't know. Tamara, is Tamara here?
Gary is here, wearing the Tamara hat. Is Gary here? I'm not sure.
I don't think Gary is here. Sorry, this is Anne Fisher. I don't think Gary is here. And so what was the question? I'll see if I can try to answer the question. It was whether the interior of the other was...
And it was whether staff at any point have ever seen the interior of the Howard building to the north of 50 or to the north of 49. Much of the focus is on the banking hall of 49, but given the significance of 51, which is also part of the site, I'm curious what the interior of that building is. I'm also currently racing, and everyone knows the EIC system is not the most user-friendly to find these interior photos because I think this is a very significant decision that we're making about this building, and to not have a plethora of these photos within the report is a major gap within the research here that's presented to the board.
Well, I don't know which staff member wrote that report on the designation of 51 last year, so I can't answer your question to whether that person actually had been on the interior. But when they do the designation, they do a fulsome look at the whole property and see and identify heritage attributes.
Thank you. And I'm looking at the HIA right now. Does anyone know which page the photos are on? It's a 101-page document, and I know we have a ticking clock here. Anyone from the applicant team or staff?
I think perhaps, Adam, you can sort of scroll through as all of these materials, like we have access to sort of in advance as well. I know that I had a thorough look of the HIA through. I do not remember the page number. It's buried in my notes. So as you go, there's so many notes I've got here about things I need to remember. So as you scroll and you so that you feel sort of satisfied that your question has been addressed, do we have other questions of staff at this point?
8:55.
Thank you.
Do you have other questions of staff? Seeing none, can we move into discussion then amongst ourselves about the items? Do we have anything to discuss? Yes, Wendy.
Oh, sorry, just quick one to follow up with the design, because when we seeing the one case that's the on the 350 Bloor Street East, and the design can accommodate with the new design, the proposed new design on top can echo with the existing design. So I think that is kind of nice examples. And for this one, instead of I just curious, is the board have any say about the design? Because it's obviously is quite a two complete different world of the historical site, the premise downstairs, and then on top with the projections for the future will be all glass, not even concrete. And I'm just seeing how that work with telling the history of the existing building now. And I know that it's also the financial district and probably with a lot of high rises and glass building. I'm trying to see it from the Google map here, and I'm seeing quite a big contrast. Well, in terms of the height but I'm just curious about whether the board will have any say about the design. That's it. Thank you. Yeah, Adam.
I think at this point, I'll refer this one back to Anne. I think this is definitely a question of staff because you're seeking sort of a clarification on this point of procedure. So we'll throw it back to staff and then we'll move more robustly into our own discussion, recognizing that sometimes the two things interflow, but it helps clerks and I think us to keep questions and discussion. So Anne, over to you.
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair. So when we look at the design, what you're looking at today is the approvals under the Heritage Act with respect to this application. So what we're looking at is the alterations to the heritage building itself. In terms of the tower affects the scale, form and massing of the heritage building, and we want to see, in line with the standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic properties in Canada, we want to see the new massing to be visually subordinate. So in terms of its detailed design, the height of it is more of an urban design matter. It's into relationship with the heritage building and how it affects its scale, form and massing and whether or not it is compatible with it. So that's what we look at. So we don't talk about the details of its design. We review its compatibility with the heritage building and how it affects its scale, form and massing and the visual prominence of the heritage building. That's what we're generally looking for.
Okay, thank you for the explanations. And okay, thank you.
Adam, do you have a question of staff or a discussion point?
Discussion point between us as board members.
Okay. Are there any other questions of staff? Seeing none. Discussion points. Mr. Wynn.
Okay. I don't feel this is the appropriate project for this site, and I would be willing to vote to reject it. There's a number of concerns. The applicant's speaking to changing a designated interior for intensification. I feel that there could be greater guidance to preserve the existing interior, and looking at the Heritage Impact Assessment in more detail now, it is a spectacular interior in that banking hall, and it would be an absolute architectural travesty to destroy that. I also have severe concerns around that lack of the zero setback on this tower. While understanding it's a very high density area, it is not the right match for those heritage buildings, I feel, especially the one above the Howard building, where it quite feels that they've just wedged something in there for the sake of making as much floor space as possible. It's really not the right fit for this site.
Other comments? Discussion? So we do have a matter, and it's within your prerogative. You can vote to recommend or to not recommend. It can go as every member chooses to vote. So we have a staff report with recommendations in front of us. Would anybody like to move this motion? Well, I'm going to put it forward so that we can actually record a vote in one way, shape, or form. Do you think, Matthew, for the sake of this one, we should do a recorded vote?
Yes, I think that's actually what that's sort of what's being asked for here. Just because you can't, you either sort of take a vote and it's all carried, but if someone wants to express dissent or voting the other way, then that should be recorded. Yes.
Then can we proceed with a
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah.
Can I have a quick question? So because again, I say that this second time for me to have this meeting. I mean, so what if let's say Adam just now so his opinion is not to, because it's not quite suitable for the sites for the new proposal. So what if that is like being voted not approved? So the building will still preserve as the way is it now, right? But without the new project on top, right?
So what has to happen is we don't know what happens after the fact. What we have is a recommendations report before us. We're going to do a recorded vote with people registering yes or no. If the motion doesn't pass, then it goes back, then that is the recommendation that is put forward to City Council, that we do not agree with the recommendations that put forward, and that is what we're recommending Council to do. In terms of any other iteration of development, etc., that is outside of our hands. The matter that we're looking at is the recommendations and whether we vote in favor to recommend these to Council or not. Because there is, through our discussion, indication that we are not going to all be in agreement, we're going to do a recorded vote to see where the majority lies. Does that help?
Okay, so to put it like very simply and direct, so if vote no, that means there is not support for the new proposal put on the top.
Yes, if you vote no, then
Okay.
you do not want, you are not recommending this to go forward.
Okay, so but the sites, the historical site will stay as the way is it now, and that will be go back to the council to make another, maybe the developer will get another proposal or whatever, right? That's out of our hand.
That is out of our hands. All we're doing is
thank
we've
you.
got the staff report and we are making a recommendation one way or the other to Council.
Thank you for explanation. Thank you.
Are we ready to proceed? Okay, Matthew, you can do the roll call, please.
Actually,
Or-
if I could ask you to say call for all in favor, and if you could just read out the first names, and I'll go ahead and write these down. Okay.
So can make sure everybody's got their cameras on. All right, all those in favor, please. Myself, Alex, Mitchell, and Paul. Good. All those opposed. Wendy, Adam, Jeff, Kurosh, and Matthew. Everybody heard their name called appropriately?
Yeah.
All right, and I think that means it fails.
It
correct?
fails. So if I believe these this item goes without recommendations. So the board has no recommendations on this.
Okay. Moving on to our next item. PB 15.11. 625 Yonge Street. And there's including 627, 629, 631, 633, 635, and 637 Yonge Street, and 1, 3, and 5 Isabella Street. Alterations to a heritage property and authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement. We have a conflict of interest.
I'm turning my camera and microphone off now.
Thank you very much. We have a staff report before us. I'm going to assume the members would like to hear it before proceeding to questions. Yes? All right. Hi, Georgia.
Hi, this is mine again. This property is also on Yonge Street, but it's located on the southeast corner of Yonge and Isabella Streets, and it is also situated within the historic Yonge Heritage Conservation District, which is not yet in force. Next slide, please. Oh, one more. Thank you. The property at 625 Yonge Street consists of two adjoining buildings, which are representative examples of Edwardian classicist style commercial Main Street buildings that are important in supporting the historic commercial character of Yonge Street. As well, this property holds value with the automotive industry and later with the LGBTQ2S+ community. An application to amend the official plan and zoning bylaw was submitted in 2021 and was subsequently appealed to the OLT. The development site includes the properties to the south at 619 to 623 Yonge Street, which are listed on the city's register as part of the Yonge Street HCD, but have been found to contain insufficient integrity to designate under Part 4 of the Act. The original application anticipated the demolition of all the buildings on the development site. Next slide, please. Throughout the review of the application and the mediation process, staff worked with the applicant, who was very responsive to conserving the heritage resource rather than demolishing it. So the proposal before the TPB now involves the in situ conservation of the two street-facing elevations of the buildings and the construction of a 70-plus story tower and a new 3-story base building along both two 3-story base buildings along both Yonge and Isabella Streets. Next slide, please. The northern portion of the tower steps back a generous 10.5 meters from Yonge Street for the first 16 levels, after which it steps back again to over 21 meters from Yonge. The tower steps back from Isabella Street 5.5 meters. Next, please. There will be minimal interventions to the two street-facing elevations. The majority of the window and door openings will be maintained and or restored to their original configuration. Some windows may be lowered to allow for new commercial uses and accessibility, but those details will be addressed in the conservation plan. In addition, the masonry, stone, and parapet restoration will further support the conservation strategy. Given that the applicant is conserving the heritage building, providing generous tower stepbacks from Yonge, and undertaking material conservation measures, staff support the application to alter the property and recommend its approval and a heritage easement agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Georgia. We have 3 speakers registered on this item. The first we have is David Eccleston of Plus VG Architects. Mr. Eccleston, do you have a presentation that you need screen sharing ability for, or what's your?
Hello, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a presentation today. I really would like to be able to respond and answer questions, especially given the extended agenda today. Want to try and keep it short. You know, I guess we would like to
Hold on a second. If I'm going to say anything, I have to start the clock.
Okay.
So if you want to just answer questions, that's great. Otherwise, we're going to start the clock.
Okay. I guess I would like to say that we support the report to action from the Senior Acting Manager. We've done a lot of work to work with the city, and we'd like to thank the Toronto Heritage staff for their work on the file. I think that I'll just leave it at that for now, and we'll see what questions there are.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Paul Farrelly.
Good day. Thank you, Chair and members of the Preservation Board. So this land assembly has taken place over time. It includes the area of the first Rabba store, and the developer is the Rabba family. And it was part of the Yonge Street HCD, as was mentioned, which was nominated by the associations, Church Wellesley on the east and Bay Clover Hill on the west. And the nomination for designation of these properties, well, the initial application was like 35 stories and demolition of the heritage. So it's 70 something now, and it's and keeping the heritage. So grateful to Adam Wynn, whose help to the associations for his research, which of course he does voluntarily, but he has a skill set that helps us in the associations, and we're grateful to all and sundry that this has been favorably received and incorporated. There's some issues on the conservation plan, like the shop fronts and the LGBTQS celebration, but commemoration, but I think that can be dealt with. I'd just like, since I've been here all day, draw attention to the members, to the staff report. Page 6, 7, and 8 contains the heritage policy framework. And I think it's a nice section of really the issues around designation, heritage register, and you know, it's right there, especially in the interest of this other item that's coming up on the COTHRA side. But I think you'll find that, you know, the Toronto official plan has very specific conditions once a building is listed. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paul. And then we have Adrian Frank. Are you here for questions or a presentation?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I, like Mr. Ecclestone, am here just for questions. We appreciate, the committee's time. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Do we have questions of any of our speakers? Seeing none, thank you all for your time today and being here and waiting for this item. I appreciate that too. Do we have any questions of staff? Seeing none, do we have any discussion amongst ourselves? Yes, Jeff.
With no real discussion, I'll move the recommendations. I think this is a notable improvement on some of the other ones we've seen today, and I'm very pleased to support it.
Thank you very much, Jeff. So Jeff has moved the recommendations in the staff report. All those in favor? Perfect, the motion carries. I think at this time, so what we have left is we have 2 items with confidential attachments. So I'd like to return to our COTHRA item because we have all of that set up to go. Then my plan is we will hear the public portions of both 12 and 13, and then we'll move into closed session so that we're not going back and forth because it takes a little bit of time. So that is the plan for our last 3. So we have now, Adam can come back. No, Adam can't come back because we're into COTHRA. I'm remembering everything now. And we're going to move, Jeff has provided a motion to clerks. Could we put that up, please? And so just as a refresher, especially for the public, we're returning to PB 15.2. And so moved by Jeff, the amendment to the recommendations is to include the request of the Senior Manager Heritage Planning to undertake an assessment for designation under the Ontario Heritage Act. Is this the property at 10 and 12 COTHRA Square, and report back to Toronto Preservation Board and/or Planning and Housing Committee and City Council such that the applicable time limits under the OHA and under the applicant's waiver, the zoning bylaw amendment application for the properties at 2 to 12 COTHRA Square are met. Do we have, I think there's somebody with a mic on. Okay, so we have the amendment before us. Is there discussion of this amendment? Seeing none, I think it is sort of pretty self-explanatory there. So we need a motion to adopt the amendment, which is by Jeff. And so now we'll all in favor of adopting the amendment, please raise your hand. Fantastic. So now we have the report as amended before us with recommendations. Any last discussion on this item? So would anybody like to move the report as recommended? So as amended, rather. Jeff will move the report as amended. All those in favor, please. And the motion carries. Thank you. Now Adam can return.
Madam Chair, were those supposed to be recorded votes?
Adam, I'm sorry. I will rely on the clerk to correct me.
Yes.
And I think I haven't.
Yeah, I think we should probably just run those again, please, if we could.
I will re-disappear myself.
I apologize. Thank you.
So we'll do a recorded vote. All those in favor of, do you want both of them, both the amendment or the report as amended?
Let's do both. So if we can just do the recorded vote on the amendment by Jeff Kettle.
Okay. So we're redoing everybody.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
the amendment that Jeff has moved. All those in favor, Jeff. Oh, yeah, raise your hand and I'll just call out your name. That's easier. So Jeff, Alex, Rush, Matthew, Paul, Wendy, Mitchell, Julia. And now the report as amended, as moved by Jeff. All raise your hands and I will call out your names again. We have Jeff, Alex, Mitchell, Matthew, Karash, Paul, Wendy, Julia.
And both the amendment and the item carry unanimously, Madam Chair.
So,
Madam Chair, the Isabella one needs to be recorded too.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna.
thank you, Matthew. The Isabella one from above. Is that correct, Matthew?
If you mean me, that's what I was recommending.
I know. Sorry.
I know that the two Matthews makes this slightly.
And you're both Matthew G, so I can't even. I'm going to wait for clarification from the clerks.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I'm just catching up. I'm understanding. So we have just done a recorded vote on PB 15.2, which Adam Wynn had declared an interest. We had failed to do so on PB 1511. So let's go back, and I believe there was a motion by Jeff Kettle to adopt the recommendations, right?
Yep.
Okay.
So all those in favor, and I'll read out your name. We'll just third time's the charm.
Thank you.
Jeff, Alex, Matthew, Rush, Wendy, Paul, and myself. All those opposed? Mitchell, which way are you going? Oh, you're in favor. So Mitchell's a yes too. Oh, leaving us in suspense at 2:44 in the afternoon. And who said Toronto Preservation Board wasn't an exciting time? All right, now that everything is above board, thank you guys for your patience. I think we can safely move on to PB 15.12. And now, Adam, you can reappear, please.
Okay.
So as I say, we're going to hear the public portions of both this one and PB 15.13 now, and then we'll move into closed session. So whoever's presenting on Broadview.
Hi everyone. I'm Neil McKay, and I'll be presenting agenda item PB 15.12.
Sorry, Neil, I'm just waiting for share permissions again.
Emma. So I am Neil McKay presenting agenda item PB 15.12, alterations to and demolition of heritage attributes of a designated property and authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement, request for directions. There will be a public and a confidential component to my presentation today, as it addresses matters subject to litigation, an application that has been appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal. I'll make a public presentation describing the proposal, after which I will turn it over to the chair to initiate the in-camera session where I will provide the staff analysis and recommendations of the city solicitor. Next slide, please. This slide shows the location of the subject property, which is located at the northeast corner of Broadview Avenue and Simpson Avenue in the Riverdale neighborhood. The property is located directly across from the Don Jail. Next slide. The property at 415 Broadview Avenue is designated under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act through Bylaw 137/2023. The property contains a place of worship completed in 1907 for the congregation of St. John's Presbyterian Church. The church was designed by the Glasgow School of Art trained Scottish architect Andrew Sharp, who built numerous early 20th century heritage churches across Toronto. The property is directly linked to the founding of the Scott Mission, which provides social outreach programs and services. And today, the Presbyterian Church is valued as a local landmark. The St. John's Presbyterian Church includes a main body constructed in 1907, as shown as in the images here. And next slide. And then as well as the southeast addition to the Sunday school wing at the rear of the church, constructed in 1914. And the hexagonal apse space is also shown at the right in the rear. There are more photos of the Heritage Church included in the report, including interior photos. Next slide. Here is the south elevation plan for the proposed development. The design of the proposed development in the settlement offer has been revised from a 10-story residential addition to a 6-story residential addition, stepped back further to the rear of the site. Previously, the proposed residential component was directly adjacent to the church's tower. As shown in the drawings, the proposal involves the in situ retention of the principal elevation of the St. John's Presbyterian Church, as well as the south and north elevations of the church to a depth of approximately 28.1 meters, as shown here. A portion of the gable roof above the nave will be conserved to a depth of approximately 12.4 meters. The proposed development involves the conservation of the St. John Presbyterian Church for the continued use by the congregation as a place of worship. Next slide. As shown in the proposed site plan, the proposed residential units will be accessed through an entrance on Simpson Avenue, where while the principal entrance fronting Broadview Avenue will continue as the main entry for the St. John's Presbyterian Church. An underground parking system will be accessed from the rear, the east elevation, of the proposed new addition. Next slide. So in the original proposal, the massing of the new construction was located above the church. However, it is now set back from the principal facade and the church tower to ensure that the tower remains visually prominent and to maintain the building's legibility and composition as a typical or typological turn-of-the-century neighborhood church on a corner lot, where it is viewed from Broadview Avenue, Gerrard Street East, and Simpson Avenue. The conservation strategy for the proposed development includes the in situ retention of the principal west elevation of the church, as well as the south and north elevations of the Heritage Church. A conservation scope of work is proposed for the retained portion of the building, including masonry cleaning, maintenance and repairs, and restoration of fenestration elements, stained glass, leaded glass, wood tracery on select windows throughout the building. And that is the end of the public portion.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions, Neil, about this portion? Seeing none, thank you very much. We are going to move on over to PB 15.13 for its public presentation. And Mr. Jeff, you need to absent yourself for this one, please, and thank you. Perfect. Neil, are you up for this one too?
Yep, it's me. Yes, thank you. So through the chair, I'll be presenting agenda item PB 15.13, demolition of a designated heritage property, request for directions. The purpose of this report is to seek instruction with respect to an application to demolish a designated heritage property. at 1783 and 1785 Bayview Avenue, relating to a zoning bylaw amendment application that has been appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal. There will be a public and confidential component to my presentation, and the in-camera session will include the staff analysis and recommendations of City Solicitor. Next slide. This slide shows the location of the subject property, which is located at the southeast corner of the intersection of Bayview Avenue and Eglinton Avenue in the Leaside neighborhood, and it's adjacent to Howard Talbot Park. Next slide, please. So the development site is currently occupied by the Leaside Station on the Eglinton Crosstown LRT line at 1787 Bayview Avenue, and two-story multiplex buildings, which contain a total of 8 two-bedroom units, shown here, 1779, 1781 Bayview Avenue, and 1783, 1785 Bayview Avenue. The property 1783 to 1785 Bayview Avenue contains a 4-unit, 2-story brick and stone-clad apartment building constructed in 1936 and 1937. And it is designated under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act through designation bylaw 244/2019, as amended by designation bylaw 948/2019. And Metrolinx declared it a provincial heritage property on June 8th, 2016. So next slide, please. The heritage property is one in a unique set of 10 properties of similar design, which date to the later half of the 1930s. It was originally owned and developed by Henry H. Talbot, who was a builder and a mayor of Leaside, and designed by the architect W.B. Galbraith. So the property is a representative example of a Tudor revival variation on the arts and crafts style. The property is valued for its association with the Leaside Garden suburb developed by CN Rail. And contextually, the property is important in defining and maintaining the consistent character created with the other 9 adjacent 4-unit apartment buildings. And that concludes my public presentation for this one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. Do we have questions of Neil of this component? Seeing none, we're going to, I'm going to move that we move into closed session to consider the confidential portions of both PB 15.12. Oh, look, all ready for me, and PB 15.13, as you see before you on the screen. So I have moved this. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Fantastic. So we will move into closed session. Jeff, you may return for the first of it, and then we'll have you go away. So it's going to be a bit of flitting back and forth for you, but you'll be present for 15.12. Thank you. Matthew, whenever you're ready.
Okay, so we can say that the meeting is now in recess. We are now stopping, putting up our tiles here, and just give us a couple minutes here, and I will let you know when. And it looks like we are streaming once again, we are recording once again, and Madam Chair, you can proceed.
Fantastic. So we are going to proceed with 15.12. Has Jeff returned to the meeting? I just want to make sure that I don't see him. But we have quorum, so.
Maybe one consideration would be we could reach out to Jeff and see if he wants to return, and in the meantime, you could do item 13.
That's smart. Thank you. We're going to do a recorded vote on PB 15.13, the one that we've just listened to. We have a staff report before us with recommendations. Would anybody like to move this one? Julia will move this one. All those in favor, and I will read out your name. I have Alex and Adam and Wendy and Courage and Paul and Mitchell and Matthew. We will give Jeff just another 30 seconds or so.
Would somebody like me to call Jeff?
I think he's hooked, and I leave it in the capable
He's right
hands.
here. He's right here.
There we go.
Yep.
Hi, Jeff. Oh, Jeff,
Oh,
you can return to camera. Thank you very much. We have now item 15.12 before us. We have a staff report with recommendations. Would anybody care to move this? I will move this one. Thank you very much. And Matthew, we don't need to record the vote for this one? No. All those in favor, please? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Many thanks. We've come to the end of today's agenda. We have another meeting in 8 business days from now. It is not going to be a short one either. So I appreciate the time of all of my fellow board members, especially for reading materials in advance. It makes things really easy for us. I appreciate city staff and the clerk's office. It's a special thing to run, especially one of these longer meetings. Thank you to the public who sort of stuck with us as we sort of work through all of the issues. Thank you very, very much. And I hope everybody has a lovely rest of their Monday. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.